I was already running on fumes when the rain started. Fat drops like pennies hitting the windshield, each one a tiny slap for waiting too long to stop. The GPS had lost its nerve 20 minutes earlier and froze to a blue dot adrift in gray nothing. The last sign I'd seen was a chipped green rectangle promising services 3 me, which became 7, then 10 in my rear view without delivering. The road narrowed, shouldered by pines whose tops were lost to fog, and then the world fell into that kind of rural darkness that eats headlights. When the station appeared, it felt like I'd conjured it. A rectangle of flickering light against the trees, a sagging canopy, a white-on-black price board where the numbers were wrong for this decade, one neen, $1.24, $1.29, then blinked and changed to 9.99, then 000, as if the sign were cycling through a memory. A single pump stood beneath the canopy like a thin, patient machine. The forecourt was a shallow lake. My tires carved wakes through the puddles as I coasted in and killed the engine. The pump was old, chrome bubbled with rust, a metal lever like a trigger on its side, a cream enamel face with glass windows where numbers would roll when it ran. Instead of a credit card slot, there was a coin hatch, stuck half open like a sneer. The smell of wet gasoline, sweet and metallic, rose from the cracked concrete. I removed the nozzle. It was heavier than it looked. The hose gave with a clammy suck, like pulling on something that didn't want to let go. "Anybody here?" I called out to the washed-out glass storefront. An open 24 hours sign burned pink and tired in the window. The door was propped by a cinder block. Rain hissed under the canopy, a steady sigh. My voice bounced off the facade and came back wrong. Echoes usually soften in the open, but this one came back sharp, as if repeated by a person I couldn't see. I glanced around. I was alone, except for the silhouette of a payphone standing like a gallows near the ice chest. The handset dangled and swung, creaking almost imperceptibly. I just needed gas. That was it. Get some, get back on the road, laugh about the creepy old station later. I squeezed the handle, and the pump coughed awake. The counter inside the glass window clicked from 0.0000 to 0.001, and I listened to the sound of liquid travel up the hose. No whine of modern motors, just a wet gurgle. My car ticked and cooled in the rain. 50 feet away, a square light flickered on in the station ceiling, then another, then a third. Inside, the aisles were narrow and tall, crammed with faded packaging that looked like it had been printed on yesterday's newspaper. The refrigeration units along the back wall were wearing a beard of frost that crept in woolly tendrils past their seals. Something dripped in the far right corner, a slow metronome. The pump meter clicked steadily, 0.018, 0.019, 0.020. The numbers seemed unusually slow, or maybe my heart was fast. I wedged the nozzle to run hands-free and walked to the door. The chime was the first thing that made me pause. Most gas station doorbells are cheery little jangles. This one was a brittle thing, a triad with one note slightly out of tune. It rang twice, a perfect repeat, though I'd only opened the door once. Cold air breathed out, cooler than the rainy night, air-conditioned even though the place shouldn't have been able to afford it. The smell inside was layered and strange. Vanilla car fresheners and damp cardboard, a sweetness like spilled syrup gone to rot. An unpleasant, arid tang of ozone that made me think of photocopiers and thunderstorms. "Hello," I said again, softer. The aisles wore a skin of dust so fine it looked like talc. A series of circular mirrors at the ceiling corners gave tiny fisheye versions of me, a damp stranger in a denim jacket, eyes hollowed by fatigue. In one of the mirrors behind me, the payphone swayed and stilled. In another, a featureless dark occupied the gap between racks like thick smoke. I set my palm flat on the counter to anchor myself. The laminate was peeling at the edge. The wood beneath was swollen. An old register, the kind with buttons like piano keys, sat atop the counter. Beside it, a jar of pickled eggs with cloudy brine. A small black and white TV behind the counter snapped itself on, the screen filling with snow that hissed and then, abruptly, stabilized into an image. It was the forecourt. My car under the canopy, rain bouncing in tiny white needles. The frame was from an angle impossible from that TV's current position. High, like a camera mounted on the sign out front. The pump handle was in my car. I blinked. On the TV, the pump handle hung down, unused. Then the TV crackled and showed me again inside at the counter, from a vantage point about 2 feet above my shoulder. I turned. There was nowhere a camera could be. My skin prickled. "Hey," I called to the room, the TV, the rain, anyone. "I'll leave cash." Silence swallowed my voice. Somewhere toward the back, a metal shelf gave a deep, slow tick like a cooling engine. The refrigeration compressors hummed, then synced, and the combined vibration deepened until the air felt like it buzzed inside my sinuses. I took a breath through my mouth, put 2 20s on the counter, and moved around it, into the forbidden little corridor behind where the attendant would stand. I don't know why. Something in me needed to convince itself there was nothing alive in that shadow. There was a ledger book beside the register, cracked leather cover with a brass clasp. I should have left it. I opened it. The pages inside were brown with grease and time. Each line held a name in careful block letters, a date, what looked like a dollar amount, and, in a column at the far right, red pencil tallies that ran 1 to 5, 5 to 10, offensive numbers. Many of the names were repeated, the dates marching. The last few entries trailed off into mess. The final one was dated 11/12, and the year smudged beyond legibility. The name read Harrison, or maybe Harryton. The dollar amount column was blank. In the rightmost column, a single enormous red zero. Below the line, in a different hand, left-handed, hurried a message: "Don't let it count you." The television switched channels by itself, static, then a younger-looking version of the same station. Same aisles clean, shelves full. A teenager in a paper hat mopped the floor and glanced at the camera with a goofy grin. The bell rang. A man in a trucker cap came in and set cash on the counter and gestured toward the pump outside with exaggerated politeness. The kid took the cash, said something I couldn't hear. The man's mouth shape looked like thanks. The TV cut to a different angle, again impossible, showing the man's back as he left. Something small and quick moved across the frame behind him, faster than a person, too heavy for a rat. The teenager's grin wobbled and died. His shoulders hunched, mouth half open, like he could feel a breath on his neck. The feed went black. The door chime rang once. Then again. Footsteps followed, soft rubber soles on damp linoleum, and stopped. I was alone. The mirrors showed only me, and in one, the narrow gap between racks that was darker than it should have been. I told myself I was done. I was going to go back to the pump, finish, drive away. I replaced the ledger carefully, turned, and walked out. The pump's meter read .0. The hose was hooked into my tank. The lever was up. There was no gurgle. What I heard instead was a tiny clicking inside the pump head, like a grasshopper trapped in a clock. Wheels of numbers rolled, but they were the wrong ones. The amount window spun like a slot machine, 666, 113.99, while gallons stayed stubbornly at 0. I squeezed the handle in reflex and met a resistance that felt biological. Not mechanical, not spring. Something compliant that tightened as I pressed. The counter jumped to .001, and my chest gave a corresponding flutter. I recoiled, dropped the handle, and the thing kept counting for a half second after it should have stopped, as if it were reluctant to let the number go. Rain ran down my face in cold rivers. I reached for the lever to shut it off, and my fingers came away blackened with grease that wasn't grease. It smelled like gasoline, yes, but also like old pennies and damp wool and the back of the refrigerator when you move it for the first time in years. "Enough," I said out loud, trying on authority. "Enough. You need power for this, right? So I'll just—" I scanned along the canopy's support, down to the conduit that ran into the building. A metal box with "Emergency Stop" in red letters hung under the awning. I mashed the button hard enough to hurt my palm. The sign out front went dark. The open 24 hours neon died. The refrigeration units in the back wall exhaled sympathetic. The pumping stopped. The world hushed. And then, from somewhere beneath the station, a generator coughed and caught. The lights came back, brighter. The sign out front didn't resume its friendly legibility. It blasted white like an interrogation lamp. The price rolled in a blur, dollar to dollars, a broken laugh of numbers. The pump reset itself to .000, and the handle in my hand tensed as if I were holding the wrist of something that had awakened. "Don't let it count you," the ledger had said. "Noted," I whispered. "Noted." I pulled the nozzle free. The tip left behind a small wet spot on my car, but the wetness didn't run. It held, a perfect circle like a pupil. Back inside, I found the door in the back wall that was half hidden behind a rack of beef jerky and expired motor oil. It bore a sign, employees only. The lock hung broken. Stairs ran down to an underbelly that smelled like hot dust and electricity, and beneath those, something animal and lactic. The generator lived in a cinder block room. Its casing was a patchwork of brands, Willard, Genco, names that didn't exist anymore. Hoses ran to it that couldn't have made sense in any schematic, some thick as wrists, some thin as veins. They didn't all go to fuel. Some sank into the wall itself, disappeared into a black resin that looked poured, not built. A low-frequency thump rolled through the floor, not the sound of a machine exactly, more like the absence of silence. Beside the generator, on a milk crate, sat a box of paper matchbooks. I took one. The sulfur tang of the match head cut the other smells for a second, bright and clean. A poster on the wall said, "Always shut off pumps before maintenance," in a font that made me think of TV dinners and smiling mascots. The TV upstairs switched on again. I heard it through the ceiling. The door chime rang, once, then again, then a third time, slow as a heartbeat. I stepped closer to the generator. The closer I got, the more I felt it. A breath warm enough to fog a mirror, expelled through rusty grills. Something slid behind the black resin, shapes that looked like knuckles from the corner of my eye and something like a jaw from the other corner. The hoses twitched. One of the thin ones lifted from the tangle, questing in the air like a snake tasting heat, then edged toward my wrist. I slapped it away with the matchbook, making myself speak because if I stopped narrating this to myself, I'd fold. Nope. No. Bad. We're done. I looked for a kill switch. Found none. There was a panel with old ceramic fuses. Each had a hand-lettered label that curled at the edges with age. Sign, freezer, lights, pump. I reached for the one marked heart, as if in a dream. There was no fuse in that slot, only a hole dark enough to make me feel taller staring at it, like it plunged in farther than a wall's thickness. All right, then. Fire. I opened the fuel line valve with a wrench I found on the floor. Gasoline gloried out in a clear ribbon, heavy with that sweet note pooling around my shoes. I backed toward the stairs, struck a match, and watched the teardrop of flame flare and steady in the tiny wind of the generator's breath. Don't look at the numbers, I told myself. Don't let it count you. As if this were a thing I could control with voice alone. The match hissed fat in the wet air, then stuttered like it might go out. I tossed it anyway. Flame frowned and grinned, then ran along the fuel like it remembered how. The resin on the walls gave a sound like rain on a far tin roof. The hoses writhed. The generator made a noise that was more vowel than machine. Upstairs, the "Open 24 hours" sign screamed in light so bright it bloomed white through the floorboards. On the TV, I could see the image of the forecourt again, but the angle telescoped, then telescoped more, until it wasn't a camera's perspective at all. It was an eye. It was the station watching its own door. It rolled its gaze to the register where my 20s sat, then down to the ledger, and in a tiny black ribbon of smoke, a red line drew itself beside a blank entry. A name scratched itself out, my name, floating, letter by letter, in burning handwriting. In the rightmost column, where the tallies were, a stuttering mark started. I bolted for the door. Flame chased me, but not like in movies. It didn't leap, it crawled like a hedge of cats, quick in bursts. I burst into the cooler's aisle and felt the refrigeration heat exchange blast me in the face like exhaust, even though that made no sense. Bottles inside the glass fogged from the wrong side, little lights within them blooming. For one heartbeat, each bottle held an image, faces. Dozens. Their mouths opened in unison. The compressor hummed like an organ pipe. I ran while the station sang. The chime remembered to ring when I hit the front door. Once, twice, 3 times. The rain had slackened. Steam rose in the doorway where heat met damp. Outside, my car sat in its private pool of sedated light. The pump hoses were not where I'd left them. They coiled on the ground like sleeping snakes. One lay across the threshold between inside and out, as if to measure it. The sign out front showed nothing comprehensible, just a cascade. 0000013-666, sale dollars, thank you. I yanked the hose from my tank, and the pump let it go with a wet creak. Liquid slopped onto the concrete in a crescent moon that didn't soak in. I got behind the wheel with the wild clarity you get when it's almost too late. The car somehow knew I needed it. It started on the first turn, engine a cool animal waking. I threw it into reverse. The station's lights seared the rain into a curtain of glitter. I slammed the car into drive and shot for the road. For 50 yards, the world obeyed physics. Trees were trees. Gravel spit from under my tires. The rear view showed the station as a receding wound. Then the road turned a gentle curve left, and the pavement under my tires vibrated in a familiar way, and the station appeared ahead of me as if drawn by a child's hand with a thick crayon, the canopy and the price sign and the payphone all in the same wrong places. My breath failed. I lifted my foot. The car coasted, and the station got closer the way nightmares do, at a speed that wasn't tied to motion. "No," I said. It sounded small, a moth colliding with glass. The loop wasn't perfect. In the second pass, the sign read 999 for an instant, and the rain was thicker. In the third, the open 24 hours letters all lit, and then one went out, the second O. In the fourth, the payphone's handset lay on the concrete, drenched, the cord coiling like an exhausted thing. I did what animals do when they're trapped by an enclosure made of smell or color. I rushed it. I drove straight for the price sign. The impact was unreal, not like hitting a solid, more like plowing into a pile of soaked quilts. The sign gave and swallowed, and the windshield filled with numbers rolling, until the only thing in the world was arithmetic. 0.01, 0.02, 0.003. A thin panic needle stitched itself through my ribs with each click. I floored the pedal. The car howled. The sign resisted with the resilience of a massive organism, roots sunk deep. I shifted tactics, reversed hard, threw it into drive, turned the wheel right, left, the way you rock a car out of sand. The sign tore with a sound like tearing meat, and my car came free, trailing a banner of wires and plastic that snapped and flailed and then went limp. As I cleared the forecourt and hit the blacktop, the station did a thing I will see and sleep until I die. It rocked on its foundations like something waking from stupor to sit up. It didn't move again. Fire licked under the door at the back and across the coolers inside. The generator coughed the way an animal coughs when it has to decide whether to keep breathing. The neon sang itself out. I drove. The loop did not catch this time. The road unfurled into a normal two-lane with reflectors that winked like friendly eyes. Trees gave way to fields. A lit billboard advertised fireworks. Civilization exhaled around me, thin but real. A porch light here, a radio tower red dot there. I laughed the way people do when laughter is the only pressure valve left. At the first genuine human station, a bright place with clean pumps and kids dragging their parents to a rack of energy drinks, I pulled in and parked and sat until my hands stopped shaking. The normal pump's screen glowed a banal welcome. I filled the tank, watching the numbers climb in rational increments, the price making sense for this year and this currency. The smell of gas here was clean, antiseptic. Radio chatter hummed through ceiling speakers. A woman at the next pump sang to her toddler and told him they could get a donut if he stopped crying. Inside, fluorescent lights were too bright, but I wanted them anyway. I bought coffee. I bought windshield wiper fluid. I said nothing about the rain or the loop or the generator with hoses like veins. Normalcy was a heavy, warm coat. I slipped into it greedily. Back at my car, I slid into the seat, set the coffee in the holder, and glanced at my dashboard. The trip odometer, which I hadn't reset in months, read 0.000. I blinked. The speedometer trembled and settled. The fuel gauge showed full. The engine idled a little fast, as if impatient. I pressed the button to toggle the odometer to lifetime mileage. The figures scrolled with a smooth, manufacturer-approved animation. They stopped at a number I knew by heart because I'd checked it last week before an oil change. It was lower now. Not by a little. By exactly 0.013. A drip fell from the underside of the dash onto my shoe, cool and faintly sweet. I touched it with a fingertip and lifted it to my nose and knew right away it wasn't water. It smelled like that station's breath, like pennies and wool and resin. In the side mirror, in the convex corner that warns objects in mirror are closer than they appear, I saw briefly the neat square of a glass door opening of its own accord, light within much too bright, and a shadow sliding across an aisle with the speed and weight of a thing that knew exactly where it was going. It was a trick of light. It had to be. The mirror showed only the cheerful spill of this new station, and a kid in a red jacket wearing a donut like a ring around his wrist. I put the car in drive. The normal road accepted me. My hands knew sunlight would come eventually, whether I believed in it or not. For the next hour, I kept glancing down at the numbers on my dash, because I am a person and numbers are how we anchor ourselves. Speed, mileage, time, fuel. Each time I looked, the trip meter read 0.0. Then on the third look, 0.01. On the fourth, 0.02. Each increase came with a small sensation behind my sternum, like a tiny digit clicking upward on a gas pump I could no longer see. I turned off the trip meter and left it there, blank. I drove until the sun should have risen, clouds thinning to a violet rag. Eventually, I will decide that what I did was enough. I will tell myself I burned it, and that the loop broke, and that what followed is only an aftertaste, not a line tied to my back. I will avoid old roads. I will keep my tanks full. I will not look too long at price signs, even the polite ones with brand colors and touchscreens, because now I know what my attention can feed. And sometimes, at home, in the quiet between midnight and 1, the refrigerator hums in a way that thickens the air in my sinuses. The digital clock on the stove blinks 2:24, and then, though I know I imagined it, rolls backward to 1:19, 0:13, 0. In those moments, on the glass of the kitchen window, I see a reflection that isn't mine lean in, just a fraction. We hold very still, the two of us. We listen to a triad ring from a door that isn't there. We count. I try not to. I try to stay uncounted. But somewhere not far enough away, under a toppled sign and a burned canopy, in a concrete room that never quite cools, something that learned my name slowly rests its weight back onto its foundations and waits, because even in the dark, even with the lights out and the chimes silent, a promise sewed into neon still holds true. Open 24 hours. The first hour in the apartment was mostly echoes. My footsteps doubled back at me off bare walls. The radiator gave one tentative tick, like a clock that couldn't make up its mind about starting. It smelled faintly of dust and an old lemon cleaner that had lost its fight a long time ago. I dragged boxes to the center of the studio, opened the curtains to a view of the stairwell window, and told myself the place had potential. Because that's what you say when you've signed a lease in a neighborhood you don't know, and the key turns with more effort than it should. By dusk, the rain came thin and steady, threading silver lines across the hallway bulb outside my door. I ate standing up, chewing on a cold slice of pizza while I tried to coax the radiator into functioning with a small wrench. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, then the sigh of my own breath. That's why the doorbell made me jump. 3 notes, high, then higher, then a soft fall, like someone running their finger down a glockenspiel. I hadn't noticed the chime earlier. I wiped my hands, went to the peephole, and put my eye to the fisheye lens. No one. Just the distorted oval of the hallway with its scuffed banister, blown glass bulb, and a rectangle of front door 4 flights below. I waited. The doorbell isn't a thing you imagine. It's too specific. I put my hand on the deadbolt, thought better of it, and raised my voice. Hello? Nothing. The building absorbed my word and gave it back as a whisper to itself. I took my eye from the peephole, stood there a moment, and told myself it was wiring, an old building with a dozen tenants and a bell system probably older than I was. I went back to boxes, the way you do when you're new and stubborn about not being spooked by the normal weirdness of unfamiliar floors and unfamiliar air. It rang again at 10:14. Same 3 notes. Peephole. Nobody. I put my ear to the door, feeling stupid and yet compelled, and heard only rain and the distant hydraulic wheeze of the building's front closer. It was colder at the threshold, the kind of thin cold that feels like a breath not connected to any lungs. I slept badly. Every creak had the clarity of confession. Somewhere above, a pipe tapped at intervals. Somewhere below, someone coughed and then stopped too abruptly. I woke at 2:21 to the doorbell and sat up too fast, heart doing its own 3-note pattern. I didn't go to the door that time. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, counting seconds. The chime didn't repeat. You can rationalize a lot in a new place. You learn the personality of the building and your brain stops flinching. That was the bargain I made with myself in the morning, after coffee and the blessing of daylight. Between sips, I held my phone to the peephole and snapped a few photos for fun. Warped hallway, light fixture haloed like a sun in fog. I went exploring. The doorbell plate downstairs did have my name hastily pen-markered onto old masking tape. The gypsum around it was crazed like river ice, and when I pressed other buttons at random, the chime sounded faintly in my ceiling. Each apartment had its own register, apparently. Mine had that three-note fall. I told myself I'd get used to it. The second night, someone rang at 9:01, 11:33, and 12:07. Each time I checked. Each time, nobody. On the last, after my breath calmed and irritation replaced fear, I cracked the door. It opened on the smell of wet wool and old hallway paint. The bulb over the landing hummed a little. The rain had stopped. That colder air pressed lightly across my bare feet like a thing tasting. I almost said something. "Can I help you?" But stopped, embarrassed at the idea of my voice traveling down 4 floors of stairwell to no one. My eye caught a scuff on the wood just outside the threshold. Not exactly a footprint, more like a faint crescent shape in the dust that hadn't been there in the morning. I closed the door gently and turned the deadbolt, then leaned my head against the brass. It was cool. I mailed the super. He answered an hour later with, "Old wiring. Happens when the front door sticks. Don't worry." Not comforting, but serviceable. That day I put up the mirror over the mantel, shelved some books, and started to think of where the rug would go. The apartment softened a little around the edges of my things. The radiator finally woke, clanked, and took up a steady, faint breathing that made the silence less explicit. I recorded the hallway that evening. I wedged my phone between books by the peephole with the camera facing out, and I set a timer to buzz at the hour so I'd remember to check it. At 10:03, the doorbell rang. I went to the peephole with that reliefless anticipation that feels like a bad habit and stared into the lens. Nobody. I rewound the footage afterward. My face hovered ghostly close to the glass. Behind it, the rectangle of hallway. The chime is just audio in a video, tinny, unremarkable. But as the sound faded, I noticed something odd in the reflection on the brass doorknob. A shape, a vertical smudge that shouldn't have been there, because I was to the side and the hallway was empty. I scrubbed back and watched the knob again. When the chime sounded, the smudge trembled, widened slightly, almost like a breath fogging a tiny circle of air. Then it was gone. "Condensation," I said aloud. To whom, I don't know. I went to bed. At 1:12, the bell rang and I got angry. You can only be unnerved so many times before irritation grows around the fear like bark around a nail. I yanked the door open. The hallway sagged toward the stairs, empty. The bulb hummed. The air felt beautifully normal. There was a faint scent of something sweet, floral, and old-fashioned, like my grandmother's hand lotion. That made me think of the previous tenant. The super had said she'd left in a hurry, which I'd assumed meant rent problems. I noticed then the little door in the hallway wall opposite mine, a utility panel I had taken for granted. It had been paint-welded shut by decades of landlords, but the edge was darker, less fused, as if someone had worried it loose recently. I bent, pressed my ear to it for a ridiculous moment, then laughed at myself and went inside, handing myself a lecture about how noble it is to refrain from calling the super after midnight about old buildings being old. When I closed my door, the chime rang again. That shouldn't have been possible. I was still at the threshold, hand on the knob. The sound was thin and near, not out in the stairwell, but from inside, almost inside me, which is impossible and sounds stupid. But there it is. I didn't open the door a second time. I stood holding the knob until my hand ached, then turned the deadbolt and walked away with deliberate slowness. The radiator ticked. Water did whatever water does in pipes that no one has looked at for 60 years. Morning brought that specific, ridiculous courage daylight gives. I pried off the chime cover. It was older than I'd thought. A brass cup with inch-tall hammers that struck thin bars, the wiring fabric wrapped and browned. A scrap of paper was wedged inside where it would never dry out. I eased it with a butter knife. It disintegrated at the edges, but the center held, slanted, hurried writing. If it rings and no one's there, do not look, do not open. Say, "Wrong house." Say it 3 times. Do not say your name. There were other lines crossed out, like the writer had been editing a prayer. Perhaps I should have laughed. Instead, my mouth went dry. I'd been looking every time. I had opened. And the tyranny of suggestion is such that a feeling I could have shrugged off as nerves now felt like a written rule I'd broken. I considered finding the former tenant. I considered telling myself it was a joke. The bell rang at 8:47 that evening, early, like a child lacking patience, and I went to the door and did not look. I put my mouth near the seam and quietly, like someone at bedside, said, "Wrong house." The air at the crack felt a fraction colder. I said it again, "Wrong house," and then a third time, because that is what the paper had said, and because once you start obeying a rule you mock, you might as well obey it well. The chime stopped. I waited a full minute, breathing like I'd run somewhere. The radiator hissed sympathetically. I unglued my feet and walked to the sink, as if any sudden movement might jostle a delicate arrangement of air I couldn't see. It rang again at 9:12. I went without looking, said the phrase 3 times. It stopped. It rang again at 9:28, and I spoke the little dismissal through clenched teeth, furious without a good target. At 9:42, something new happened. Instead of the 3 notes, I heard the softest scrape, like a finger on paint. Then a voice, not quite a voice. The sound you make inside your throat when you need a word and it won't come. A shape of sound. And it was my name. Not perfectly. The vowels bent slightly, the last syllable lengthened like a foreigner trying to be exact. But it was my name, in that not voice, from the other side, pressed thin through wood and old air. I didn't say it back. My tongue wanted to, the way you want to finish a tune someone else hums. I stood with my palms on the door, feeling how heavy a door can be when you ask it to be a wall between you and something you can't admit exists. The paper had said not to say my name, so I didn't. "Wrong house," I whispered. "Wrong house, wrong house." Silence. Then, from the kitchen, my phone began to ring. It was stupidly funny for a second. New building, new phone number. I let the unknown number go to voicemail and then paused when the voicemail icon did not appear. The phone was still ringing, softly, from no call at all. I picked it up and put it to my ear and heard the 3 notes of the doorbell playing through to the other side of the line. I put the phone down. I took the mirror off the mantel as a precaution I couldn't explain and faced it toward the wall. I taped over the peephole with a torn sticky note. I unplugged the chime, and the wires made their little impotent spark and died. But when the bell rang again, a minute later, the sound came from the window glass. I don't know how I understood it. Some knowledge arrives unearned. The bells were not a single bell. They were the idea of a bell, an invitation, a vector. You open doors in more ways than with a key. The utility panel out in the hallway creaked. Wood talking in the plumbing night. I took a breath and opened my door. This time, there was something to see. Not a person, a smear of vertical air where the panel sat. A place where the hallway was slightly wrong, vibrating a little, as if 2 images had been printed on top of each other and didn't quite register. In that not quite place, a small darkness hovered the size of a thumbnail. The peephole might make a similar circle if you cut the lens from the door and held it in the air. The darkness widened. The bulb over the landing buzzed, faltered, and the 3 notes sounded again without source. I said, "Wrong house," and the circle quivered, narrowing a fraction, not retreating, but considering. The urge to offer anything else rose like nausea. My name, yes, but also the reassurances we offer people we cannot see fully. "Can I help you? Are you lost?" It's a reflex to be polite to doors. The circle extended like an ink spill opening, licked the air an inch beyond the seam in the panel, then pulled back, as if testing pressure. The smell of hand lotion, sweet and powdery, swelled and then thinned. Behind me in the apartment, my phone went off again. Not a ring this time, a chime from a calendar I hadn't set, 3 notes, then another 3, as if the device were a child learning to speak a foreign language by echo. I stepped backward, keeping my eyes on the panel. The circle tracked, maintaining distance, then jutted forward a hair. I had the stupid idea that it could see better if it were closer to my eye. I palmed the sticky note off the peephole, pressed my eye to it, and met an eye looking back. It was not an eye in anatomy, but my brain, desperate for analogies, supplied the word. Pupil dark at the center, a paler ring at the edge. The little circle in the hallway swelled as if the peephole were a mouth and I had opened mine too. The chime fluttered, delighted. I ripped my head back. The darkness held the size it had attained, Then, like someone pouring water steadily into a cup that couldn't hold more, began to run down the wall toward the floor, groping for the line where door met threshold. The cold that lives under doors met me like a hand, flat against my shin. I shut the door. The impact felt exactly like pressing two magnets of equal force together. The wood did not move. The thing on the other side wanted the seam. It didn't bang. It didn't scratch. It simply exerted the idea of entering, and the door and I were responsible for defining the noun of inside as a place it could not be. "Wrong house," I said, panting now. "Wrong house. Wrong house." My phone chimed. The mirror against the wall creaked faintly. The kettle on the stove ticked, settling metal, 3 beats like a test. Every bell in the world suddenly enlisted. The scrap of paper again in my head. The other lines, the crossed-out ones, had included words I could half reconstruct in memory. If unanswered, it comes inside. If answered with your name, it becomes you. That last line wasn't on the paper. That last line was mine, a thought that arrived as a cold certainty. The sickness of it passed through me. Perhaps the previous tenant hadn't left in a hurry. Perhaps she had left here and gone, a perfect copy, and the copy had kept her lease for a month before the super noticed that the apartment was empty. I don't know where the idea came from then. Maybe from something older than my time in this building, older than these wires. Bells call, but they also push away. I tore the chime off the wall, took the brass cup, and the small hammers fell like insects. I held the cup by its rim and struck it against the edge of the sink. It rang out pure and sharp, no pretty 3 notes, just a single clear sound that made the molecules of the place arrange themselves along its length for a shocked second. The hallway sound stuttered, the pressure eased. I hit the cup again and again, finding a rhythm that felt like purpose rather than panic. The panel in the hallway uncreased. The circle narrowed, tightened, shrank in on itself with a kind of offended dignity, and then went small enough that I couldn't say for sure if I was looking at a flaw in air or simply the memory of one. I stood shaking, my ear on the door, listening. The building breathed. Someone flushed a toilet 3 floors down. My phone at bedtime brightness showed me nothing but the reflection of my own eyes. 3 nights passed without the bell. On the 4th, as I brushed my teeth and told myself I had imagined a lot and survived the rest by accident, the chime played softly from the oven's cooling glass. I froze, foam sweet and chemical in my mouth. I swallowed, tasted wrong, and went to the door. "Wrong house," I said. Silence. I lifted the brass cup from where I had set it on a towel like a pet. I tapped it once gently. The note hung, thin but true. I slept on the floor that night with the cup on my chest, like a knight with a shield that would embarrass any painter. At 3:03, something brushed the outer face of the door, a sound like bare skin on paint. I said the phrase without getting up. I tapped the cup. I don't know how these things end. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's the point. You don't fix a threshold. You tend it. You don't outrun an invitation. You learn how not to make it. I taped the peephole for good. I moved the mirror into the closet. I never gave my name to the stairwell, though sometimes when groceries occupied both hands and the key slipped and clattered, the urge to say it came sweet and stupid to my tongue. The super replaced the hallway bulb. The utility panel received 3 new stubborn coats of paint. The building did what buildings do, healed itself around its old wounds. On my way to work last Tuesday, a courier buzzed all 4 floors with the machine gun impatience couriers have. I heard my 3-note chime echo faintly as I locked up, and a second later the woman from 2B flung her door open with a sigh. No one stood there. She rolled her eyes. "Kids," she said to me as I passed. "Probably," I said, and felt the brass cup's weight in my backpack, a ridiculous charm. On the ground floor, the front door stuck as it does when rain swells wood. I leaned my shoulder into it, and it gave with a little groan. The street smelled like wet concrete and coffee, like morning. I stepped out. The door began to close behind me, glass fogging briefly where my breath touched it, and just before it latched, I heard the faintest sound from upstairs, from inside, from everywhere the idea of a door might be. 3 notes. High, then higher, then the soft fall. I did not look back. I said, aloud to no one, to myself, to whatever waited with its ear at all our thresholds, "Wrong house." And for now, the house agreed. The first thing I notice is the hum. Not the friendly buzz of a place awake at odd hours, not the scratchy speaker that sneezes out old pop songs, but a hum with weight to it, thick as the blue vests hanging on the break room hooks, low as the floor scrubber that sleeps like a marine mammal the size of a van. It presses on my ears as I step through the sliding doors into the bright, endless Walmart at 2:48 a.m., a minute after my orientation manager told me to clock in for the overnight. "Welcome to the team," she said earlier, smiling like she believed it. "Most people get used to nights. It's peaceful." The sliding doors hiss at my back. The vestibule smells faintly of rain-soaked rubber mats and the ghost of popcorn. I'm not sure why I'm nervous. It's just a store, I tell myself, a warehouse dressed up like a city. I pull on my brand new vest, blue with a yellow spark that feels like a promise, and clip my badge to my chest. My reflection in the glass is the pale creature from a second shift life, eyes like tired coins, mouth a thin line. Behind me, stacked pumpkins grin with printed faces, while the seasonal aisle transitions prematurely from late summer to Halloween. It's August outside, but Walmart lives 2 months ahead of time. The future is on clearance. "Morning," says a voice from the greeter podium. I turn. An elderly man stands there, hands folded over a belly under his own blue vest. He has the hairline of a wise owl and a nose that looks like it's been broken by an honest life. His name tag reads Earl in placid black letters. He smiles at me, and the smile is not forced. "First night?" he asks. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckles. "There's only one kind of person who walks in here this alert at 3 a.m., and it's not shoppers." "Do many come this late?" I ask, stepping toward him. "Enough," Earl says, and glances at the clock over the customer service desk. 2:50 a.m. "You'll be fine. Stay out of receiving your first shift. Listen for the calls. And if the intercom says clean up on aisle 3, don't go." He says it like a joke and not a joke. Before I can ask what he means, he lifts a hand in an old, sweet gesture, the kind people used to leave on vessel decks watching their children leave home, and says, "Welcome, son," in a voice too soft for my bones. I head to the time clock. The punch-in screen is a happy face with instructions in simple fonts. The keypad feels warm. As I clock in, a cool breath rolls from the cooler aisles. Someone opens a door somewhere, and a sensor chimes. My assignment tonight, according to the printed schedule I keep creased in my pocket, is to face the shelves in home goods, pillow shams, picture frames, those soft fleece throws people buy like bandages for cold evenings. "I'll check in on you at 3, my orientation manager had said. "Just keep it tidy." I wheel my empty cart into aisle 37 and feel the way the light is different at night. It's the same wattage, of course, the same flat white fluorescent, but emptier. Without bodies to break its path, the light feels like it runs too far, into the gaps between aisles, into the open rafters where birds wedge nests in spring. The store makes distant cracks and pops, heat and cold negotiating with steel. Somewhere a scanner trills like a small bird. Somewhere a pallet jack chirps, backed up by an invisible employee. I'm not alone, not exactly. There's a crew in receiving and a kid named Javi who resets end caps with the reverence of an altar boy. But the store is big enough to swallow everyone. I settle into the rhythm, pull a throw forward so its seam aligns with its twins, turn all the picture frames forward, tuck the tags, the glossy paper on a sign swishes when a vent turns on. I find pleasure in the neatness. It feels like writing my name on a fogged mirror, temporary but mine. Then I hear it the first time, a soft, wet slapping, not loud enough to be footsteps, not sharp enough to be a dropped item. It's as if something is tapping the shiny linoleum a few aisles over. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. My skin goes tight as I straighten a row of teal candles. I tell myself it's the floor scrubber waking, rolling to its nightly patrol, but the scrubber when it runs sings a big diesel hymn. This is quieter, human. "Chavi," I call, my voice too loud in the open. It hangs, embarrassed, and falls. No answer. The intercom pops, a little static like static from my childhood television when my father fiddled with the rabbit ears. "Associates," says a reedy voice. Reminder to return misplaced items to the appropriate bin. Then, a beat later, almost under its breath, a ribbon of words I hope I mishear. "Clean up on aisle 3. I freeze. I'm in 37. 3 is groceries, cereal, paper towels, end-of-aisle displays with towers of bottled water. "Don't go," Earl had said. I imagine his smile, the way the skin sat so gently over his bones. I don't move, and why should I? Cleanups happen, spills happen, someone else will have a mop. Still, the hair on my arms prickles hard enough to feel like pinpricks. The hum grows louder just for a moment, as if the store inhales. I keep working. I fill a gap in the fleece throws where the gray ones go. My fingers brush something wet and cold, not water, not slime, but something that leaves no residue, like cold air made tactile. I yank my hand back, heart jumping, and stare. The throw looks normal. No glistening, no dark patch. That's stupid, I say aloud. You're being stupid. My voice steadies itself with the speaking like a skater finding balance. I turn and a person stands at the end of my aisle. They wear a blue vest and the uniform khakis. For half a heartbeat, I relax. Another associate, thank God. Then I see the face. It isn't that it's wrong. It's that it's wrong the way a portrait painted from memory is wrong. The features are all there, but something is unconsidered. Like the face doesn't know what a face is supposed to be. The eyes don't blink. Can I help you? I ask. The figure is still for a long time. Then it nods. Not yes, more like a slow, deliberate agreement with an old fact. It turns and is gone, like it simply slid into the adjacent aisle without moving its legs. The humming breath of the freezer section whistles through the gap in the shelves. For a minute, I can't breathe properly. It's as if the store is the only one allowed to have air. The intercom pops again, a clutter of channels. Code Adam, says a voice, firm, automatic. We have a code Adam. Lock main doors. A boy in a red shirt, named Jay. Then the intercom chokes itself and switches to Muzak, to a guitar line that exists only to not interfere with shopping decisions. But the main doors slide open somewhere far down front, and I feel the music of the air pushing inward. A cartwheel squeals once, off-key. I push my empty cart to the intersection. Listen, my job is not security. My job is not to investigate. Still, if a child, the thought trails. There's a trick to late-night Walmart. The aisles you can see are not the map of the store. The store folds around itself like a paper fortune teller, corners of toys touching edges of produce in impossible ways when you're alone. I think of my orientation map pinned on the break room wall, the clean rectangles labeled with numbers, and how in the dark those rectangles turn to doors. I step into the main corridor that bisects the store. A movement catches my eye near seasonal, one of the many flat smiley faces on a rollback sign, yellow, untroubled, spins on its string with no air to urge it. It turns, and when it faces me, for an electric second, I see the mouth has become a flat dash. Then it's a smile again, still spinning. You're overtired, I tell myself. You're primed. I take a breath and force myself to walk to aisle 3 because the words scared me and I refuse to let words make me small. The overhead signs say, paper towels, bathroom tissue, cleaning. The linoleum smells like lemon and something else. Bleach's cousin from the bad part of the neighborhood. I round the corner. A spill blooms across the floor near the end cap like an ink blot test. It's not soda. It's not milk. It's not anything that reflects light the way liquid should. It is colder than the air, and the cold has shape, an oval that drags light down. Beside it, underslung mop heads sleep in their plastic, and a yellow sign stands neatly. Caution. Wet floor. The sign is already there. No one is. Don't, says a soft voice behind me. I turn. Earl stands with hands on the handle of a shopping cart he's not using, as if he needs to hold something. Under the aisle's fluorescent glare, his skin looks the color of paper left near a window too many years. His eyes glitter with something between worry and grief. Earl, I say, relief swarming me like bees. It's not for you, he says. This isn't tonight's job. What is it then? A remembering. He swallows. His throat works. He looks not at me, but at the dark oval on the floor the way you look at a headstone. Go on back to your aisle. Stay busy. The store likes busy. The intercom, I start. It always says that, he says, at 3. We stand and listen to the hum. The clock ticks forward in my head. 2:58. 2:59. What happens at 3, I ask. Earl looks at me. The look is such a hurt thing that for a heartbeat, I want to step forward like you do when you see a neighbor fall on ice. We are inventory, he says. Before I can ask how he means that, the air shifts. It's like the store's soul slides into a new notch, a flexing of steel bones. The Muzak cuts. Somewhere far behind us, in the caverns of receiving, a chain drags, and the intercom, clear, clean as a bell, a voice both nowhere and everywhere says, "Clean up on aisle 3." But this time the words aren't words, they're a hand on my shoulder. They're the taste of aluminum on my tongue. Follow. Something moves in the cold oval, like a fish breaking the skin of a pond. Two small knuckles rise and tap the clean tile. Tap, tap, tap. A child's hand. My body moves before my hope can keep up. I kneel, and the cold kisses the bones of my knees through denim. "Hey," I say too brightly. "Hey, are you?" A face lifts out of the dark like a reflection up out of a well. A boy, 6 maybe, hair plastered to his forehead by cold that isn't wet. His eyes meet mine. They are utterly calm. "Come back," I whisper. "Come on, give me your—" His lips move, but the voice is not from his mouth. It is from above, from the intercom. "Associate assistance required." The boy's eyes flick to my name tag, and his face rearranges to mirror my exact smile. Then it unfolds, petal by petal, into that not face I saw at the end of my aisle. "No," Earl says, voice sharp. "Don't touch him." "It's a kid," I choke. "It's the store wearing a kid," he says, and his cart rattles as his hands tense. It remembers long enough to get help. It wants you to pick it up. Then it knows your weight, and it can assign you to a pallet. "Aye!" The thought is too absurd and too terrible to accept. Assign me to a pallet. The words make a cold picture. A human form, shrink-wrapped neat with boxes of appliances, the label printout warm as breath. I look at the boy again and my stomach turns. His hand reaches. The skin on his arm stops at the wrist like the sleeve wasn't printed. The rest is a shadow. Something huge hums awake behind the back wall. The floor scrubber's motor yawns and settles into a purr. The hum becomes a voice if I listen wrongly. That voice says, "This will be easier if you lie down." I stand fast and step away. The boy's face does not change, not even to scowl. It is merely a template that no longer fits the object. The store inhales again, deeper. The automatic doors at the front stutter shut, then open, then shut. A cart somewhere clatters without a hand. The price rollbacks flutter like moths when there is no wind. I feel more than hear the click of locks in the garden center. "Earl," I say, What is this?" My voice is child small. The truth about 3 a.m. He doesn't take his eyes off aisle 3. Half the town shops here. A quarter works here. All the missing things come here too. Time counts wrong after midnight. The store keeps the extra minutes. It stacks them with the shrink. And then, he gestures to the cold oval. It runs inventory. It calls by aisle. If we answer, we're counted. If we're counted. He lets the sentence fade like a price sign bleaching in a window. "How do you know?" I whisper. He swallows again. I answered. I start. But when I turn to look at him full, I see what I didn't want to see. Earl's name tag is slightly wrong. The font is almost but not quite the store font. His vest's blue is almost but not quite the store blue. He isn't breathing, and on the wall behind the greeter podium, the memorial photo that I didn't register when I walked in, the black-framed one with the tasteful script, reads, "In memory of our friend and greeter Earl. 1949 to 2019. It's hung with a loop of yellow ribbon." "I don't mind staying," he says into my silence. "But I don't like what the store does, and I don't like how soft the new ones look at 3. Walk away from it. Busy yourself. If it calls your aisle, won't someone else answer?" I ask. "Remembering doesn't stop for kindness," he says, and the intercom clicks. 3 a.m. The store exhales. The cold oval jerks as if tugged by a hook. The knot boy's head tilts like a puppet's when the string goes taut. The voice above us sings from every speaker at once. "Clean up on aisle 3. "No," I breathe, and I run. I don't run away so much as sideways into an aisle of plastic tubs that echo like drums when my cart hits them. The store rearranges itself the way a sleeping person turns over, and the map in my head dissolves. I choose speed over sense. I turn down toys, then camping, then books, the air full of cardboard smells and the faint perfume of rubber bike tires. The end caps watch me with faces made of product packaging grins. The intercom follows. "Associate," it says in a voice that is almost my orientation manager's voice, and then not. "Assistance required." It lists my name. The sound of my name coming down like rain makes bile rise in my throat. "Please respond." I aim toward the back wall. If I can get into receiving, maybe I can find people. I picture the cement floor, the high dock doors, the piles of pallets, the orange ladders that feel safe because you can climb them. I push through the double swinging doors and into metal-smelling cold. Receiving is tall as a church. Pallets stand patient in rows. The baler squats like a metal animal at rest. The green light on its side blinks. The floor scrubber hums where it sleeps, except I see now it isn't sleeping. Its steering wheel turns a fraction, then stops. The little headlight eyes flicker. It is waiting. "Hello?" I call. My voice sounds crushed under the weight of the ceiling. "Javi, anyone?" No answer. I step into the asset protection office because it is the only room with a closable door. The AP room is a closet of screens. Cameras show every part of the store at once, a mosaic of aisles. On one screen I see aisle 3's empty end cap. On another, I see myself from behind in receiving, my blue vest a bright flag. On a third, the front doors closed and open and closed. On a fourth, the greeter station, where the memorial photo of Earl sits quietly, while a shadow of a man stands with his hands on a cart, mouth moving with words no one hears. Something shifts, and all the screens flash to the same image, aisle 37. Home goods. Neat rows of fleece throws, newly faced. The picture frames aligned. A blue vest standing in the middle with its hands at its sides like a child awaiting instruction. The vest is empty. The shape of a person is in it, but there is no person. Only a hollow cut in the air wearing my clothes. I turn around as if I'll find it behind me. My pulse is so loud it makes the screens shimmer. The intercom whispers my name into the speakers in the AP closet. Hearing it in a small enclosed place makes it obscene. "Associate assistance required," it says. "Come to me. Be counted." "No," I shout, and the shout makes me braver. "No, I'm not your inventory." The scrubber hum deepens, like a beast disappointed. The baler's green light turns amber. The lock on the AP door clicks. It doesn't sound like a lock so much as a label printing. CHK out. I grab the radio off the desk, but the channel is dead, filled with a thin hiss that, if you listen long enough, pronounces words. I drop it. I look at the tangle of wires beneath the screens and grab a fistful with both hands and pull. The wire bundle holds. I use my foot against the desk and pull again, and something gives with a plasticky snapping sound. A screen goes black, then another. The intercom makes a sound that is not static, not feedback, but something like an inhale through teeth. I don't stop. I rip until sweat runs in my hair and my palms burn. When the last screen goes black, the intercom voice lifts into a tone I recognize from school fire drills, a protest that is also a warning. "Unauthorized access," it says. "Loss prevention. Loss prevention. Loss of..." "Good," I say through my teeth. "Lose me." The door unlocks. I run. I don't know where I'm running to. The store keeps its breath in a different place now, as if the vent system turned around. The air tastes like copper. The boy-shaped cold has moved, somehow, into the corridors between the aisles. I feel it sliding alongside me like a shadow pacing a train. When I pass aisle 3 again, because of course the store brings me back to where it wants me, the oval is gone. In its place, a neat square of matte floor where the polish was never laid, like a missing tile in a pattern. The yellow caution sign stands upright on it, as polite as faith. The intercom clears its throat like a manager about to be reasonable. "Associates," it says, "we appreciate your attendance." A warmth gushes from overhead vents like breath on a mirror. The fluorescent lights buzz at a frequency that makes my vision pulse. "Please return misplaced items to the appropriate bin." Then, delicately, clean up on aisle 37. My aisle. "No," I say, but the word is as effective as telling fog to behave. I feel it then, the store's attention pivoting like a camera. The price tags along 37's mouth flutter one by one, shivering in a wave as something passes them. The inventory guns left in a charging rack near housewares begin to chirp in a rhythm. Beep, beep. It sounds like a heart monitor. I don't go to 37. I go to the front. The doors are glass, and beyond them the parking lot lies like an empty airport runway. Orange sodium lights make the carts look tragic. I see my car, a blue hatchback with a dent on the right rear. If the doors open, I can run. If. They slide as I approach, then stop. The gap is as wide as my hand. The air leaking through is cool night and oil and the faint smoke of a truck stop. I put my fingers into the gap. The doors nip gently but firmly, like a dog that doesn't want to hurt but will if pressed. I pull and they push back without force. I could shove until my shoulder pops and they would still only politely deny me. Please do not exit through the entrance, says the intercom in a voice so benign my rage shakes me. Thank you for shopping. Earl, I yell. Help me. He stands at the podium. He looks at me with that soft, hurt look again, as if I'm a thing he won't get to keep. He lifts one hand, palm out. Don't answer it, he mouths. It takes me a second to realize he means not to respond to the intercom. Keep moving, busy. The store respects a task. I do the dumbest, most useful thing I can think of. I grab a stray cart and start pushing. The cart squeals. Its left front wheel resists, then relents with a clang that echoes in the big room. I push it fast, down Main Street, past pharmacy, past electronics, where the television wall all shows the same default screensaver of a meadow that is no meadow I've seen. As I push, I say out loud the things I'm going to do as if I'm on a training video. Go to receiving, I tell my imaginary camera. Get a box cutter, cut through to the garden center gate, force the latch, out. It's nonsense. It feels like magic. The intercom tries my name again, sweet and possessed. I drown it with the cart's scream. I push until sweat runs down my spine, until my palms blister where the handle's plastic seam is imperfect. I push like I am begging the store to let me be a machine. And something yields. Maybe it's the fact that it can't decide which aisle to Hadouken me into. Maybe it likes that I've picked a lane. The garden center doors are chained, but the latch is just pin-locked, and the box cutter is right where it would be in any store, next to the tape on a pegboard. I drag the cutter down and the pin snaps. The chain rattles, lazy as sleep. I shoulder through into air that smells like fertilizer and rust and the dew of things that live. The ceiling opens to sky. The intercom is only a taste now, a thread of sound. The stars over the garden center are a handful of crumbs on black velvet. Not enough, perfect because of it. At the exterior gate, a heavy bar holds the door shut, but the emergency alarm has been disarmed for shipments. I lift, and it lifts. The door screams like an animal as I push it out. Somewhere, a single light blinks in sympathy. The parking lot yawns in front of me, and the lot's emptiness is a mercy and a horror. I don't run for my car. I turn back because I am made wrong, because I have to see. Through the garden center's chain-link fence, through the long run of glass, I see the store take a breath and let me out of its chest. It doesn't chase. It doesn't grab. It closes the doors the rest of the way and goes still. For a second, I think I see a small hand pressed to the inside of the glass, leaving no print, and behind it, a blue vest with nobody in it standing with saint-like patience in aisle 37. The caution sign in aisle 3 tips, right itself, tips again. Earl stands at the podium like he always has, like he always will at 3. He lifts a hand, I lift mine. He doesn't smile. He looks proud and tired and full of loss, and then the lights overhead stutter once, like a blink. When they come back, the podium is empty. The hum lessens, just a shade. The clock over customer service flips to 3:17 a.m. in its digital teeth. I walk to my car without running. The keys in my hand feel like a weapon and a toy. When I unlock the door and slide in, the fabric seat gives that Walmart-bought little crackle sound under my weight. I sit and put my head on the steering wheel and laugh once, a sharp bark, because the receipt printer voice from inside the store is still in my head, and it says, "Thank you for your time." As I pull out of the lot, something white flutters under my wiper. I click it once, twice. The paper clings. I stop and peel it away. It's a receipt. No items. No prices. Just my name at the top, not in the store font, but in my own handwriting, like I signed for something. The timestamp reads, 3 a.m. Below, a return policy in the smallest fine print I've ever seen. Returns accepted within 90 days at 3 a.m. only. Receipt required. No exceptions. I crumple it into my pocket because I'm too tired to be brave. I drive home on a highway that feels like a conveyor belt. I shower. I try to sleep. The hum takes longer to fade than water dries off skin. At 2:59 a.m. the next night, as I sit on my couch in the blank light of a turned-off television, a pop of static cracks the quiet in my apartment. For a second, my ceiling becomes a loudspeaker. In the half-breath of silence before it says anything, I think about busy hands and labeled hours and how a building can want. Then my own phone, on the coffee table, lights up on its own. The screen is bright as aisle linoleum. An alert bar scrolls from an app I didn't download. Associate assistance required. clean up on aisle 3. I put the phone face down. Outside, the town breathes and forgets and remembers on its own schedule. If I never go back, maybe I'll be uncounted. Maybe I've already been put in as shrink, written off as loss. Maybe in 90 days at exactly 3 a.m., I'll find myself standing by automatic doors that won't open, holding a card I don't need, saying welcome to some new, foolish, hopeful kid. For now, I sit very still with my hands busy, folding and unfolding the little square of receipt I swore I wouldn't read again. My name on it has started to fade. The fine print doesn't. I do not answer the call. I keep moving. I keep busy. And the store, for tonight at least, lets me be unscanned. When we signed the papers, the realtor called it character. A deep porch with beadboard ceiling, leaded glass that softened the late October sun into honeyed squares on the floor, narrow stair treads worn down by a century of other feet. It was the kind of house you imagine on postcards, white clapboard, dark gables, a walnut banister that curved like a violin neck as it climbed. To my wife, Lena, it was history. To our kids, Sam and June, it was adventure. 2 staircases, a butler's pantry, hiding places we hadn't even discovered yet. To me, in that first hour, it was just relief. We'd gotten something we shouldn't have been able to afford in a neighborhood with maples that arched like cathedral ribs and a school where the teachers smiled with their eyes. The previous owners were already gone. Job transfer, the realtor had said too quickly. We moved on a Wednesday. By evening, the place smelled like wet cardboard and new paint. The kids sprinted loops through the dining room and back hall. I assembled beds while the radiator knocked and breathed. At 10:30, with everyone finally asleep, I stood on the landing, hand on the polished curl of the banister, and listened to the house tell me its story in pipe groans and settling sighs. The air had an edge to it, something metallic, like a penny pressed to the tongue. It might have been nerves. New houses hum with other people's routines that haven't gotten the message they're over. You hear a squeak and think floorboard. You hear a rustle and think curtain. You tell yourself it's character, because you have already signed your life to a mortgage. The letter came the next morning. The envelope lay on the front hall rug, slid through the brass mail slot. No stamp, no postmark. The handwriting on the front was old-fashioned and precise. To the new family. Inside was a single sheet, thick and soft, black ink, no smudges, welcome. I have watched this house for a very long time. I will watch you too. That was it. Lena laughed. I tried to. Neighborhood kids, she said, folding the letter back into its envelope as if it might crease. She tucked it on top of the refrigerator, out of reach of small hands. We met Mrs. Klein from across the street as she brought over brownies and gossip. Beautiful bones, she said, standing in our hallway with plastic wrap breathlessly tight over a paper plate. We all look out for each other on this block, especially with the Watcher house, you know. She blinked when she realized what she'd said. The old place 3 doors down. Some silly story. I'll let you get settled. 3 doors down, a similar house sat closer to the street. Its porch was deeper, dark even in daylight, as if it pulled light into itself. I noticed, without meaning to, that the second-story windows were free of curtains, as if someone wanted an unobstructed view. The second letter came that night, also without a stamp, slid under our door sometime between dishwashing and putting Sam back to bed for a 3rd glass of water. Keep the north-facing curtains open. I need my lines. Lena went still. What lines? She said. That's not funny. Kids, I said again, though it tasted wrong. The handwriting was the same immaculate script. We locked the doors and checked them twice. I walked the perimeter, mind tallying every window latch. The back stair was a tunnel of shadow until I found the switch. The basement smelled of iron and damp stone, of cold earth. There were scar marks on the concrete near the old coal chute, crescent scratches like fingernails had tried and failed. I told myself they were from a water heater dragged out 40 years ago. I slept poorly, and it turned out not where I thought I had. I remember the bed and the heaviness of sleep, then waking with my cheek against something grainy. The hallway runner. Cool, old wood under my palm. I had wandered in the night, apparently, and lay down there like a dropped thought. When I stood, a draft slid down the staircase and made the little hairs on my arms lift as if listening. At breakfast, June's cereal spoon trembled in her hand. Who was on the porch? She asked. Nobody, I said. The lady, she said. She didn't knock. She just looked. I stepped onto the porch and scanned the street, but it was a Saturday morning in a kind neighborhood. People raked leaves, kids biked, a mail carrier pushed a cart, glancing up with that assembly of tired and friendly that only federal employees can master. The only porch that bothered my eye was the one 3 doors down. It was empty, of course, yet my skin prickled with the conviction of being observed. That afternoon, we discovered the first hidden door. Or rather, Sam did, by flinging himself into the linen closet with such force that the back panel popped free. He called out. Behind the stacks of sheets was a narrow passage, barely wider than a shoulder, running along the bathroom wall. "Cool," he shouted, and his voice came back thinner and farther away, altered by the throat of the house. I got the flashlight. The beam picked out lath and old plaster, cobwebs like silk stockings, and a series of little sliding shutters at eye level, 4 of them, all along the length of the passage. I slid one open and found myself looking through a thumb-sized hole into our hallway, toward the curve of the banister. The whole rim was smoothed by use. I put my eye to it and felt, in my bones, a sensation I couldn't name, something private and intimate and wrong. I slid the shutter closed. We told ourselves it was a dumbwaiter corridor that had been repurposed. We told ourselves it was quirky. We told kids it was off limits and nailed the linen closet panel back in place with shaky competence. That night, when the house grew quiet enough that I could hear the clock in the dining room measure the seconds, the radiator hissed like the release of a held breath, and the ceiling above our bed creaked with the clear weight of a footstep. It wasn't the small skitter that mice make, though I tried to tell myself it could be that. It was a step, slow, deliberate, as if testing the board, as if not wanting to disturb anyone. Then another. Lena's hand slid into mine under the blankets. "It's old," she whispered. "It's old, and it's going to do old house things." When sleep came, it was the kind that forgets. Morning brought a third letter. "You forgot to open the north curtains. I need to see them wake." The handwriting had grown larger, the loops tighter. There was a strange smell rising from the paper, faintly floral and faintly sour, like a perfume that had sat too long on a dresser in a room that wasn't aired. I called the realtor. She was all public sympathy and private impatience. "It's a prank. It's October, for heaven's sake. Do you want me to call the sellers?" I told her not to bother. I didn't want to be the family that bought a house and immediately made calls about letters with no postage. We opened the north curtains. The windows faced a narrow side yard with a fence-like ribs and a view of the neighbor's brick wall. For what it was worth, nobody was there to appreciate the unobstructed line. Understanding came in tiny, coughed-up bones. You think you have the shape of a thing until you choke on the next piece. The baby monitor, June insisted on one in the early weeks, though she hadn't been a baby for years, began to pick up, not words at first, breaths, a rhythm that wasn't the house's, wasn't ours, a low humming, tuneless and intent. I went room by room, unplugging electronics, dealing in the currency of control. The humming grew clearer. It was older than the house, impossible as that is. I could feel it in the soles of my feet. I started to notice what the house liked. It liked the curtains open at dusk, when the light made rooms into panes of soft gold. It liked when we were in the dining room at night, under the big chandelier, all of us visible at once. It liked the lamp in the front window left on when we went to bed, the way the glow gave anyone outside a clean outline of the stairwell. It liked children's laughter. It liked routine. And when it didn't get its preferences, there was a small, mean way the air went stubborn, as if the walls held their breath, doors stuck, bulbs popped. We were being trained. I told myself no. I told the house no. I turned off the lamp in the front window. I closed blinds in the dining room. I shut the linen closet and put a bookshelf in front of it. I did my job as a father and as a reason-giving man. The house did not argue. It observed. On the 6th day, I found a ledger hidden in the pantry, behind a false back that gave with a little pressure like a held pulse. It was a composition book with a black marbled cover and a crackled fabric binding. Inside, neat columns filled the pages, names and dates and times. North window, 2 to 4 a.m., Mrs. E. Landing peephole, 5 to 7 a.m., K. In some lines, tiny hash marks seemed to count breaths. At the end of each week, a note, maintained lines. I closed the book as if it might open its mouth. I did not tell Lena. I didn't want to be the kind of person who brought that into air and made it real. You know you're in trouble when the rational mind starts rationing itself. The kids began to dream the same dream. I realized this only because they both described a woman with black eyes and no lips standing on the second-floor landing, and they described her the way kids do when they're worried that if they say it wrong, she will come to correct them. She had hair like wet rope. Sam said, very serious, and her hands were not right. She doesn't knock, June added. She just looks. She looks like she's waiting for me to look back. June started to leave things for the woman on the landing. Her red ribbon, a polished stone shaped like a heart. The ribbon would be gone in the morning and then returned, folded precisely, on June's pillow. Was that you? I asked Lena, trying to make the question sound like a smile. What was me? Her face was pale with rehearsed calm. Please don't make me ask what you think I did. The house was learning us, and it was patient. By the end of the second week, the letters took on a disappointed tone, like a tutor noting that a pupil still hadn't grasped grammar. This is a north window home. You must understand the responsibilities. You are a family. Families watch. The house chooses its watchers. The house chooses its view. That night, the power went out at exactly 3:17. The digital clocks flatlined, little red numbers dying all at once. Lena and I lay in the strange dark, where the street lamp's sodium orange turned the window frames into thick-boned crosses. I heard the door at the end of the hall open. I could picture it, the slight rattle as the latch gave, the whisper as the wood swung. June stood there, a white oval in the doorway. She wants me to see, she said. Her voice wasn't sleepy. It had the careful, measured cadence of a phone operator. Go back to bed, I said, and my voice cracked. She said it's my turn to watch. I got out of bed and lifted her. Her body was stiff and light, like empty firewood. When I turned toward her room, she lifted a hand and pointed, slow and certain, toward the stairs. She'll be angry, June said, as if reciting. Buddy, I said, using a nickname I hadn't used since she was 3, nobody is going to be angry with you. Behind her words, under the night, the house made a sound. Lena didn't hear it. Sam slept through it. But I heard it and felt it in the planks under my feet. The house was disappointed. I gave the house something it wanted the next morning. I went to the linen closet and pulled away the bookshelf, splinters under my fingernails. I pried off the nailed panel with a flathead screwdriver. I opened one of the little shutters and put my eye to the old peephole, offering my gaze like a coin, like a sacrifice. I looked at the banister curve, though in my other eye, the one pressed to the wood, I felt the burn of being looked back at. If you offer enough times, you begin to understand ritual. We tried the police. Not 911, but the local number, the kind you call when you need a quiet talk and the name of a patrol car to keep an eye on your street at night. An officer came, young and competent and slightly embarrassed to be dealing with curtain preferences. He walked through our rooms, his eyes squirreling past the ledger even though I had tucked it away. He glanced at the windows. I can talk to your neighbors, he said, but you did say these letters have no stamp, no postmark? So whoever is doing this is coming right up to the slot. You haven't seen any unusual figures? The house across the street, I said. Mrs. Klein called it the Watcher House. He nodded as if he had expected it. Kids tell stories, but you might want to invest in motion lights. We did. They bloomed into white in the yard whenever a leaf moved. They clicked on at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night for 3 nights. Each time, I ran to the window and saw no one. Each time, when I woke fully enough to understand the shape under my feet, I realized I had gotten out of bed and stood at the glass for minutes, 10, 20, my breath fogging the pain, my reflection ghosting, then clearing, then ghosting again. On Saturday, we met another neighbor, a gray-haired man named Anwar, who walked his dog with a deliberate gait, as if each step measured out something he could not otherwise control. He paused in front of our house and looked at the second-story window. We all thought you'd take down the curtains, he said gently, like telling me I had spinach in my teeth. Do you? I started and swallowed. Do you get letters? He gave a slow, amazed smile that was not friendly. No, he said. No, only that house. He pointed, Not to the one we had started calling the Watcher House, but to ours. Only this one. I went to the basement. Sometimes you go to the place where the stone touches earth because you need to feel something that is not invented. The basement was older than the rest. The foundation stones were round-backed and irregular, mortared together like a puzzle with solutions only masons know. The coal chute was sealed with a new steel plate, welded recently. On a whim, I tapped it with the handle of a screwdriver. The sound came back muffled and strange, as if there were space behind it. When I put my ear to the plate, it was cold and it hummed. Not electricity, not water. A human, patient sound, breath. Behind the water heater, where the tubing loomed like chrome ribs, I noticed an old vent grate with slats dusty with unbreathed air. I eased it out, coughing on grit. Behind the grate, a dark vertical shaft rose and fell through the house, a gallery to carry warm air from the furnace to upstairs rooms. It was also, I realized as an animal hair fluttered past my face, a speaking tube of sorts. I reached in and felt the smoothness of worn wood, and there my fingertips brushed paper. I drew out a rolled sheet, stained and fragile. It was a floor plan of the house, hand-drawn in careful ink. Along one wall, little circles were marked with tiny numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. Along the landing, the same. And along the north wall of the master bedroom, our bedroom, more circles. Someone had labeled them in that meticulous script, lines. In the seam where the plan had folded, a second paper had stuck. A note, clipped from newspaper like a ransom letter, words glued in a careful row. The house watches through you. I burned the plan on a plate in the sink, a childish and doomed act, because the smoke climbed the shaft and took the message to every room. The next day, the letters changed. Thank you for your service. You are better watchers than you know. The next night, I woke on the landing with my cheek pressed to the wood again, my hands cramping as if from scribbling. A pen lay beside me on the runner. There was ink on my fingers, the same particular black that scented the letters. When I touched my tongue to the ink stain, tasting again that same faint perfume and sourness, something primitive and deep in me flinched. I went to the fridge and reached, almost without my own permission, for the envelope we had placed there that first day. I slid the letter out and held it beside a grocery list I had written. I didn't need a handwriting analyst. Loops are people's fingerprints. The angles of mine tilted just so. The capital F leaned like a man against a bar. The handwriting on the letter was mine. Lena found me at the kitchen table with both papers laid out and my face in my hands. What? She said, not a question, but the softest possible request for translation. I lifted my head. It's me, I said. She shook her head. No. Lena, I think I wrote them. No, she said, louder. You think this is funny? You think this is romantic? Honey, the ghost is me? I wake up in the hall, I said. I don't remember walking there. There's ink on my fingers, and the letters. My voice broke, because once you start contending with the absurd requires a different geometry of pity. The letters are in my handwriting. She crumpled without moving, like paper that has gotten wet. The house had taught me a new truth. Nobody ever really believes in their own peril until something homely shifts. A cup where you didn't put it. A hair, you never had a hair that long, on your pillow. Your handwriting on the wrong paper. We could have left that morning. We should have. We didn't. Because it was a school day. Because there were boxes to unpack. Because the dog hadn't been to the vet in the new town yet. Because we were still arranged in our old lives, and the furniture of those lives doesn't move quickly. Even now, sitting at a table far away from that house, I do not forgive myself for how slowly we moved. The house let us make our mistakes. It did not hurry us. That was its kindness. It was a nor'easter that finally shook something loose. The kind of storm that makes a house show its bones. Wind leaned its whole body against the siding. Rain came sideways, striking the windows like thrown gravel. The gutters gurgled and then gave, spilling water like laughter. The power held until just before midnight, then stepped off the ledge and took the whole grid with it. The house settled into rain dark and wind moan, and the basic animal sounds of wood complaining. Lena lit candles, a circle of light on the dining table, and we played cards with the children, pretending it was a camping game, until we all yawned too much to keep up the lie. The kids went to bed, the house creaking a little with their small, familiar weights. We sat there in the candlelight a while longer, watching the wicks gutter. The sense of being observed was so strong that my eyes kept unfocusing, hunting the edges of the room where, if there were a figure standing just past the reach of light, I might confuse it for a chair or the grandfather clock Lena had fallen in love with in a junk shop. At 3:17 exactly, a bell rang. Not our doorbell, an older bell, thin and crisp and high. It came from inside the walls. I felt it more than heard it in the crease behind my teeth. A second bell answered from upstairs, deeper, a bass to that soprano. Then another, a mellow note from somewhere between floors. The house chimed like a layered instrument, each bell finding its tone, the whole making a pattern that felt like a hand on the back of my neck guiding me toward the stairs. "Don't," Lena said. She hardly spoke. Her whole face had become the word. "Don't go. I think it wants." I stopped because saying it aloud would be a treaty signed in ink I couldn't remove. Lena, the kids, we went together, our steps matching. On the landing, the air thinned as if we had climbed too high. June's door was open. Her bed was empty. The little rabbit she slept with lay on the rug, face down as if ashamed. The bells made a pattern. The pattern led to the linen closet. Of course it did. The bookcase we had put back in front of it had been slid aside by someone with my strength. The panel had been pulled free by someone with my hands. The passage gaped like a throat. I went in. The world smelled of dust that had never seen daylight. My shoulders brushed the lath. Its splinters were warm as skin. The little shutters were all open. Light from our candles stuttered through the holes, making a dotted line down the length of the passage. Each peephole gave a keyhole view onto a place I knew, the banister, the landing, the top step. Each had a small stool beneath it, a stool too narrow for an adult to sit comfortably for long. At the end of the passage, a final shutter opened onto our bedroom. There were new scratches around the hole, pale raw wood. My cheek fit the hole perfectly. "June," I said, my mouth against the wall as if leaving a kiss. The word went into the wood and slid away. No answer. The bells faded, the last sound lingering like a thought you cannot finish. And then, elsewhere, a door closing. A basement door. We ran down, the house pressing on us, its angles suddenly wrong. The cellar steps were listening steps. Every time my foot came down, the house memorized the weight of it. The old coal room door was open. Behind the welded plate I had tapped earlier, a draft sighed with a smell like cold pennies and laundry left too long in a bag. There was, beside the plate, a thin seam I hadn't noticed before. The storm's pressure had made the house pull apart just enough to make it visible. I slid my fingers into the seam and pulled. The plate swung inward like the cover of a book being opened onto a page you don't want to read. The space behind was not large. A man could stand in it if he tilted his head, if he agreed to make himself smaller. A child could sit. There was a chair, narrow and high-backed, with leather straps blackened and cracked by time. In the beam of my flashlight, dust swarmed like tiny lives. The chair faced a wall made of wood blackened smooth by hands. And in that wall, 100 holes had been drilled. Big ones at adult eye level, smaller ones at child height, tiny ones down near the floor. Each hole was beveled, their edges polished by skin. The view through them was impossible to parse at first. Little circles of other rooms, other angles, the world cut into coins. The landing, the north window of the master bedroom, the second stair, the dining room chandelier's lowest crystal. All the lines. The chair was not empty. June sat very straight, small hands resting on the arms as if waiting for a photograph. Her eyes were open and dry. She looked not at me but at the wall of holes, and she did not blink. "Sweetheart," Lena said, voice buckling. June startled as if pulled up on strings. A smile stretched across her face. It was not hers. It was a smile of someone who had been practicing the shape for a long time and could not quite remember the reason for it. "It's okay," she said, with a tone of long adult reassurance. "It's my turn." Lena moved toward the chair. I grabbed her arm because the part of me that the house had apprenticed knew this was a ritual, and rituals do not like interruption. The house made a small, pleased noise, and the bells chimed once, a single, perfect note. I let go. Lena rushed forward and unbuckled straps that were not buckled. They fell with the weightless slap of old leather. June blinked, and her eyes came back into being hers. She turned her head. The smile tore like paper. she whimpered, a small animal sound, and flung herself at Lena. The house shuddered. The holes in the wall, they weren't just for watching, I realized. They were for letting something through. The passage of gaze is not one way, not if you do it with enough intention and for long enough that your eyes learn the mindless prayer of it. We had been feeding it with our looking. We had kept the lines. It wants the view, I said, my voice very calm because when panic unthreads it sometimes makes a kind of clarity. It wants us where it can see us. It wants someone at those holes. It wants us to watch. What does that mean? Lena whispered. It means I've been writing the letters. It means I've been getting out of bed and standing at the window and putting my eye to the shutters to give it what it asks for. It means it's not outside the house. It's inside, and it's hungry for our attention. Outside, the storm pushed its shoulder against the foundation. Water flowed in a line under the door like a finger. The house breathed, plank to stone to lath. The bells chimed again, one note lower, hungrier. I had thought the confrontation would be with a figure, a woman with black eyes and hair like ropes, a neighbor in a hood, an old man in the crawlspace. I had expected a thing, but the thing was simply this, to stop giving it what it wanted. I turned. I looked at each hole in turn, flooding the wall with my face. Here, I said, as if offering a sandwich to a dog. Here, here, here. The bells quieted, curious, the house's attention focused, as attention will, on the one who moves. Take the kids upstairs, I said to Lena. Turn on all the lights. Stand in the dining room and pick up your phone and call the police again, and then call Mrs. Klein, and then call Anwar, and then turn off the north-facing lamp. She didn't move. What are you going to do? Feed it, I said, and then starve it. People talk about houses as if they are bodies, faces, bones, skin, and like bodies they can be trained, they can be shocked. They can form habits. I would break the habit of being watched through holes. I would change the lines. I climbed into the narrow space and sat on the chair. The straps fell cold over my wrists, slick with the oil of old hands. I put my eye to a hole, ours I thought with a sick rush, mine, and stared. It wasn't like looking through binoculars. It was like aligning something in myself with something in the house. When the sight lines met, the bells sighed, satisfied. I felt, in the back of my head, a pattern start up, reach, hook, pull. The more you look, the easier looking becomes, until it is as natural as breathing. I stared until my eye watered and my lids burned. When I blinked, the house made an annoyed sound, a faint huff in the timbers. Okay, I said to the hole, to the house, to myself. Okay, here's the trick. I took the flashlight and jammed it into the space so that its beam washed across the wall of holes. I took off my shirt and stuffed it in the largest holes. The old leather straps I tied into knots and shoved into the next. I tore the chair's pad with my teeth and packed the batting into holes until it looked like a wall of blind sockets. I took out my phone and turned on the screen as bright as it would go and laid it face up against the wood. Light bled into the holes and flattened the view into nothing. Light can blind as well as illuminate. Then I did the thing I had not let myself think. I put both hands against the wall with my fingers spread and leaned. The wood was old, but it was not weak. It pushed back. I leaned harder. Something gave with a crack that sounded like a bone confession. The bells rang in alarm, discordant. Elsewhere in the house, doors slammed, every one of them. The note went like a line through my teeth. Upstairs, I heard Lena yelling my name, and beneath that, a new noise. The engine of the generator Anwar had mentioned, rumbling into reluctant life. Lights flickered. The house swallowed and couldn't get enough. I leaned until I thought my shoulder would skim off its socket. The wood split. A line of black opened, and I pushed my arm in as if I were reaching into a chest. On the other side, my hand met air that held the whole house in it. I grabbed for any old thing, plaster, lath, a bracket, and yanked. There was a sound like the first break of ice in a river, and then the wall gave way in a sheet, revealing not the dining room or the stair, but simply emptiness. The interior of the interior, a cathedral of beams and ducts and the long, narrow veins of the air shaft. The holes were only holes. They looked small and foolish, a stopped flute. The house staggered. I felt it ripple up through the foundation, through the old mortared stones, into the bones of the thing. The bells chimed once more, a thin sound like an apology. Then they went quiet. We left the next morning. We left like we were running a marathon in a dream, slow and heavy and wrong, because the power came back on, and the sun came out, and it was a Sunday, and it felt ungrateful to be afraid when the maple leaves were so stupidly beautiful. But we left. Boxes in the car, the dog in the back seat panting a yeasty morning smell. The house watched us from its windows, but the gaze felt old now, arthritic. My daughter unspooled her red ribbon from her fist as we drove away and let it trail out the cracked window like a thin vein of blood. It flew on the wind and then slipped free and fluttered down in the middle of the street like a mark on a map. We didn't sell the house. Don't ask me why. Some part of me thought we owed it a gentler end than another family with soft nerves and curious children. Some uglier part of me thinks we still believed it was ours in the same way a dangerous thought can be yours, and you can pretend you own it when it owns you. The letters stopped, the bells stopped, the baby monitor hummed with the unromantic white noise of neighbor TVs and plumbing. We rented a small apartment with scuffed floors and a view of a parking lot where teenagers practiced skateboard tricks. The windows faced west. We kept the curtains closed when we wanted and open when we wanted, the kind of freedom that makes you embarrassingly grateful. Weeks passed. We learned the sound of the new pipes, the rhythm of the neighbor's shower, the thumps of the boy below us playing basketball on a rug. We sent the kids to a counselor who had a warm voice and shelves of books with plain covers. I learned to sleep with my head on the same pillow when the night slipped, smoothing my routines into something reliable. I stopped waking up with my face in the hall. Then, 2 months later, an envelope slid under our apartment door. No stamp, no postmark. My heart, which had learned better, still made an old mistake and stuttered. Thank you for your service. She likes the west windows now. I will watch you too. I held the paper with 2 fingers like it might have heat. I took a breath. The air of our apartment smelled like coffee and the faint chemical cheerfulness of laundry detergent. The letter's ink had the same perfumed sour note as before, whispered from another life. Is it another one? Lena asked from the doorway, already knowing. I shook my head because the truth was more bent than yes. I turned the paper over. On the back, in small, agitated script, a line had been added, not in cut-out letters but in pen. The line tilted just so. The capital F leaned like a man against a bar. You are better watchers than you know. I did not remember writing it. We moved again. We went farther this time, a different town with a slow river and a view of hills. The house we chose was ranch style, flat and stubborn, with windows that made no promises. We installed heavy curtains and we bought the kind of lamps that glow like an apology. We told ourselves we were done with character. We told ourselves that a house is a tool like any other. It keeps rain off and it keeps heat in. If you have to convince it of your existence, it's not a house. Sometimes late, I wake and listen, and there is nothing. The silence is not thick or performative. It is ordinary. Lena shifts and mutters. June snores, a little trumpet. Sam turns over, all knees. I put my hand on the wall and feel nothing but drywall's plain cold. I thank the wall for being stupid. Other times, I wake with ink on my fingers and the ghost of a scent in the air. And when I go to the door of our new ordinary home, there is an envelope on the mat and the handwriting on it is nobody's but mine. And I realize the worst thing. The house is only part of the truth. The rest is the habit that lived in me, the door I learned to open inside. I don't watch at windows anymore. I don't seek lines. I move through my day with a deliberate aimlessness, breaking patterns on purpose. I don't sit in the same chair twice. I close curtains at noon and open them at midnight. I deny the kind of gaze that turns into a tether. This is how you starve a thing that feeds on watching. You give it nothing to measure, nothing to hold on to. And still, sometimes a bell rings, not in the house and not in the world, but in that private corridor behind the eyes, and I feel the tug, reach, hook, pull of a ritual that learned me as much as I learned it. The letter waits. I put it in a drawer and do not open it. It waits. I wait. We are a standoff composed entirely of looking avoided. When people ask about the house we came from, the way people ask about scars as if witnesses might offer you absolution, I tell them a story that is mostly true. It's about old vents and hidden passages and someone living in the walls. They nod. They watch too many movies. They are relieved by the idea of a person, a culprit, a figure who can be arrested. I don't tell them the other story, which is the one I now carry every place I move, that attention is a kind of worship, and there are things in the world that will be made of it if you let them. There is a family in that White House now. I know because I went back and parked across the street and watched them carry in a sofa too big for the door, watched the way they laughed when it didn't fit, the way the little boy clapped when the legs finally cleared the jam. Their curtains are open in the north windows. The chandelier is on at dinner. There is a line of sight from the second-floor landing to the front porch that is clean as a highway. I do not ring their bell. I do not slide a letter through their slot. I do not warn them. I am not the watcher, I tell myself. I am just someone who has known the temptation. And yet, when I drive away, in the rear-view mirror the house's face, its windows and gables and deep dark porch, arranges itself into a look I have seen on humans who have spotted someone they love at a distance. Not hunger exactly, not even need, recognition, a greeting. When the river house is quiet and the kids are asleep and the world is as kind as it gets, sometimes I take out the last letter and unfold it. I don't read it. I only hold the paper and listen to the ordinary noises, the fridge murmuring, the heat ticking in the baseboards. I try to feel nothing at all. I try to starve the habit in me. I am getting better. Sometimes I forget for whole days. Sometimes I wake in the morning and there is no ink on my fingers. Sometimes I stand at the kitchen sink and see only my own reflection in the black evening window, not a set of smaller windows nested inside, a banister, a landing, a curtain barely moved by a breath that is not mine. If there is a moral, and I'm not saying a haunted house deserves one, maybe it is this. Do not confuse quiet with safety. Do not confuse observation with care. And do not, under any circumstances, assume that what is looking through the hole is outside. It might be the house. It might be you. It might be the old, hungry ritual waiting for a family to practice it. The last time I drove past, the maple leaves were new and ridiculous, a color that made me laugh out loud, alone in the car. The Watcher house looked smaller in spring. Children's drawings hung in the north window. From the street you could see a red ribbon, tied to the banister at the landing like a reminder. I felt the bell ring inside me, and I put my hand on the steering wheel and kept going, because that is also a kind of watching, and I am trying to look at other things. I didn't notice the rocking at first. There was too much else crowding my head the day we moved in. Boxes like gray cliffs in the entryway, the smell of fresh paint and plaster dust, Mara fussing after a car ride that stretched into eternity, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that turns minutes syrup thick. Our new house, a narrow 3-story with a dormer window and a sagging porch in a town I'd only seen twice, accepted us with that hollow echo empty houses have, echoing our footsteps back to us, unfamiliar and faintly judgmental. By the time I carried Mara's bassinet up to the second floor, Crabapple Street had gone blue with evening. The nursery was smaller than I remembered, its one window framed by peeling lace that the previous owners had left. It smelled like lemon oil and old wood. The radiator beneath the window ticked like an impatient metronome. The crib waited under the eaves. I hadn't bought it. We hadn't ordered one. Our friend Hannah, the real estate agent, had texted me after the closing. They left behind some nursery furniture. Antique, looks nice. Want me to arrange a pickup? I told her we'd take a look. We didn't have a lot of money to outfit an entire room after the move, and I'd always liked the idea of old wood, old things with a history. The crib fit the room like it had grown there. Dark walnut, high spindled sides, the kind of curved headboard you only see in museums. A tiny carved moon peeled on one post. There were runners attached, like a rocking chair. You could lock them with a brass latch, or release them so the whole thing would sway. When I put my hand on it, it was cool, and something about the curve of the wood made my palm fit perfectly. I was too tired to be superstitious. I glanced at the mattress, thin but clean, with a new fitted sheet. Someone had cared enough to freshen it. I lifted Mara out of the bassinet, her body a small, warm weight against me, and laid her inside. Just for tonight, I said out loud, because speaking it made it feel less like a decision and more like a stopgap. There's a lull that happens after a long day, when the lists stop screaming and start murmuring. I fed her in the rocking chair by the window, watching through the lace as the neighborhood lights came on, square by square, as if a hand passed over them. She grew heavy in my arms. Her mouth softened. Her lashes cast faint shadows on her cheeks. I settled her, tucked the muslin blanket under her arms, and stood there, a foot on gray rug, one hand on carved wood, waiting. A late train keened somewhere far away. The radiator clicked. A breeze crept under the sill, smelt faintly of wet leaves and the river a few blocks over. I might have imagined the first sway. It was so gentle I thought it was me leaning. The crib barely moved, really. A whisper of motion, a suggestion. The runners murmured on the wood floor with a sound like breath through teeth. The brass latch was engaged. I'd checked it. I checked it again, jiggling it with my thumb. It stood firm. When I took my hand away, the crib shivered, as if remembering something, then went still. "You're losing it," I told myself. "You need sleep." And that was true. I had slept in increments for weeks. Mara was 3 months old, and I hadn't yet tasted the fabled sleeping through. Those words lived somewhere beyond a fog bank. The fog never broke. Downstairs, the old house gave another small, hollow sound. I told myself it was the settling of something, a beam adjusting its opinion of gravity. That first night was almost normal. Mara slept 3 hours straight. It felt like a miracle. In the pauses, I began to map the house in sound. Pipes burbled. The porch made a knuckle-cracking noise in the wind. Somewhere a clock with a lazy heartbeat ticked. I dozed and woke, the thin leash of sleep never quite slackening. At 3:30 I rose, climbed the stairs, and stood in the nursery doorway, the threshold between gray and darker gray. The crib rocked. It was unmistakable in the hush. The runners creaked at the edge of hearing. The breathing rhythm of it filled the room, or rather, it filled me. I heard it in my own chest, like a metronome had been set inside me without my consent. I went still all over. The brass latch, my mind informed me, had been on. The floor, my mind informed me, was slightly slanted. We'd noticed it downstairs, the way a marble would wander. A draft, my mind informed me. Houses do this. You're new here. You're exhausted. If you are exhausted enough, a bird tapping can become a message, a coat on a chair, a stranger. I stepped forward. The movement ceased. The air felt strangely cool over the crib, as if a window had been opened and shut again. I slid my fingers along the rail and felt a ridge where the varnish was worn, a trace of something sticky, like old sap or old glue. In the moonlight that pooled on the floor, a thin glint winked, a thread snagged between two spindles. I pinched it free. It was hair. Pale. Very fine. Mine, probably, or from the previous owner. I dropped it into the trash and tried not to picture hands threading it there. I remember telling myself when I lay down again that the world is full of creaks that mean nothing. By morning it felt ridiculous enough to laugh about. I texted Hannah a picture of the crib and thanked her for letting us keep it. She put a heart on the photo, then wrote, "Cute." The previous owner, the widow Keene, remember her? Loved antiques. That crib's been in that room forever. You're gonna have great naps with it rocking. I stared at the message a long time. Mara stiffened, and I bounced her on my hip, looking at the carved moon again in the washed-out morning light. It looked more like a mouth. Mrs. Keene. I didn't remember her in any vivid way, just the sense from the closing that the house had belonged to one person for a long time. Long enough for the floors to learn the paths of her feet, long enough for certain furniture to become part of the rooms, the way a tree and a fence become entwined. I imagined her old hands on the crib's rails. I wondered how many babies had slept in it, how many tears the wood had absorbed. "I'm not throwing it out," I said, to no one in particular. "We're not wasteful people." The second night, Mara woke screaming at 12:07. It wasn't her usual fussing. It was a hard-edged sound that replaced the room. I was upstairs before I knew I'd moved, hair prickling against my scalp. The nursery smelled like something I couldn't immediately place. Lavender, yes, from the sachet I'd tucked in the drawer, and something else under it, watered iron, rain on pennies. The mobile above the crib, paper moons, soft gray clouds, turned lazily. The window was closed. The radiator hissed. Mara thrashed, fists tight, face boiling red. I lifted her, pressing her small heart against my own, kissed the top of her head. "Shh," I said. "It's all right. It's all right. It's all right." The words are a spell for yourself as much as for the baby. She sucked in a breath and sobbed it out again, then burrowed under my chin. I swayed with her, automatically, my feet finding a tide. When I set her down 20 minutes later, the crib began to rock. Click, click, whisper, whisper. Not fast, not enough to jostle her. Just a steady ghost tide. I checked the latch and found it engaged. I pressed my palm against the headboard and felt, ridiculous as it sounds, a pressure coming back. Not a resistance, more like if you press two magnets together with the same poles facing. The air felt thick like a room right before a thunderstorm breaks. The mobile turned once, twice, and a cloud shape caught and spun. The hair wave at my nape lifted. I took my hand away and the motion persisted, as if it had a mind. The sound, soft wood on wood, began to insinuate itself into the quiet, as if it had always belonged there, and silence was the aberration. Sleep deprivation does tricks. It digs tunnels under the path and waits for you to step wrong. I told myself that. I whispered it like a prayer as I went back to bed and lay there with the house breathing and the crib counting. In the morning, while Mara napped, I resentfully Googled self-rocking cribs on my phone, knowing full well there was nothing mechanized about the one upstairs. The internet offered devices with names like Dreamwave and Soothe It, shining with modern plastic. Ads followed me all day. The old crib waited upstairs like a stubborn elder in a room of glossy strangers. When I carried up a load of laundry, I found the muslin blanket tugged loose, tucked on the other side, a little pocket, a nest made by careful hands. I remembered tucking it the opposite way. Maybe I remembered wrong. You remember wrong a lot when your days blur. A knock at the door made me jump. Through the glass I saw a woman in a cable-knit sweater, her white hair caught back in a clip, her smile the tentative kind neighbors wear when they are not sure of anything yet. She held a pie in a tin. I opened the door and introduced myself, and she said, "Nora, the house across the street with the magnolia tree. I saw the moving truck. Thought I'd bring something." Her eyes slid past my shoulder, reflexively inventorying. We made the small talk of polite strangers. When she asked how old the baby was, her whole face warmed. "We don't see many little ones on this street anymore," she said. "It's good. It'll be good to hear a voice in that house again." "In the house again?" I repeated, thinking of empty months. "Mrs. Keene," Nora said, as if it explained everything. "She died in there in February. Quietly, not—" She saw something in my face and patted the air. "I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. She was old, and it was peaceful," her niece said. "She was a good neighbor." She hesitated, then added almost delicately, "She loved children." I pictured loving them from a distance, a woman behind lace, watching a dozen families pass by on this street over decades, rocking an empty crib because she never had one of her own. Something sentimental and faintly sad tugged at me. "Did she have any?" I asked. Nora looked past me again, as if she could see the stairs curving up. "A long time ago, a boy," she said. "He died before he was a year old. There was sickness back then. People didn't bring meals over, you know? They made everything quiet. She stayed with her sister's children some summers after that, but she came home always. She kept the room ready. She would not let anyone take the crib." Nora's voice altered slightly, picking up a careful cadence, the way voices do when they're quoting something often said. "The thing about Lucy Keene," she continued, and so now I had a first name for the ghost in my head, was she always believed some things had to be kept moving. "Sign of life," she said. She had a rocking chair that never stopped. She'd push it with her foot when she knit. Nora smiled ruefully. "Nerves, maybe, or a kind of faith." When she left, she touched my arm. "If you need anything," she said, a set phrase, a kindness. Then, after a moment's lingering, she added with an uncertainty that made her mouth crease, "If the old house noises bother you the first months, give yourself time. The house likes people in it." She said it as if like could be a verb for a building, and I suppose it can. That afternoon, a storm rolled in out of nowhere. The kind of summer thunder that tenses the air and electrifies the hair on your arms. Rain drilled the street. The magnolia trees bowed, the gutters sang. The room dimmed, and the nursery went blue again, an underwater light. Mara napped through it like a little log. I sat in the hallway, legs out, back against the wall, watching the notch of the nursery door I'd left cracked open. For no reason at all, really, except that the dark in there felt heavier when sealed, and you could watch without alarming yourself if the crack was exactly so. That's when I heard the music. Not a full tune, not first. A thread. It might have been a wind chime's wounded idea of a lullaby. I held my breath, and it reformed, as if my listening had allowed it to gather. A hum again, then, God help me, a woman's voice almost under it, carrying a melody that was as simple as salt water and just as elemental. It wasn't a modern lullaby. It was something older. There were no words I could catch, just a vowel drift. The house made a small, drowning sound as the storm shoved at its sides. I stood up without quite meaning to and pushed the door wide. The crib rocked steadily, not fast, not slow. The runners sighed. The mobile turned of its own accord, the paper moons making a whir like moths on a lampshade. Mara slept open-mouthed, surrendering herself to sleep with the complete trust babies have when the world is right-sized. The hum braided with the rain. It seemed to come from the wood itself, the thin sound a wineglass makes when a finger runs its rim. My instinct flared, mother bear primal, dumb and clear, take the baby. The feeling was both ridiculous, you can't mother bear a lullaby, and absolute. I stepped to the crib, slid my hands beneath her weight, and lifted. The hum ebbed, as if surprised. The crib rocked once more, twice, then slowed. When I turned to the door, Mara snuffled and twitched, and the hum rose again behind me like a question. I walked away from it. I carried her to our bedroom and let her nap in our bed with a forest of pillows. The nursery's blue dim lay behind me like a room seen from a highway in passing. I realized my heart was beating too fast. I could have told myself a story that made it all lovely. The house loved children, Nora had said. Mrs. Keene loved children. She loved motion. A rocking crib and an old house, their noises knitting in a storm. The hum, wind under eaves, the lace making a mouth of the window. I almost told myself that, and maybe I should have, because we choose the stories we live inside. But the feeling in my spine when I turned from the doorway wasn't lovely. It was the feeling of someone in the back seat when you were told firmly you were alone. That night, I dreamed in blue. I woke twice to the baby monitor's green eye. The second time, something like static smeared the screen. The image pebbled into view, then dissolved again. I hit the side with my palm, 6-year-old logic still my go-to. Hit it until it behaves. The image returned, a ghost image on a ghost-lit screen, the crib's spindled shadows wobbling with the slow rock. In one broken frame, there was something like a shape bending over the crib, then not there in the next, the pixels a crown of bubbles rising in dark water. The third night, I moved a chair into the nursery and sat down. It was an absurd thing to do, if you think of time as currency. Anyone sane would have put a pillow over their head and prayed for 4 hours in a row. I cannot explain why the idea of letting it rock without me was worse than the idea of sitting and watching it rock. Maybe because there is so much in parenthood that is not watched by anyone. Maybe because I needed to feel that I was the person who knew what my child's sleep sounded like and what it did not. The house at 3 a.m. is an anatomy lesson. The bones creak, the blood whispers in the pipes, the radiators are lungs. Outside, the train drew a far line through the night and left it empty again. The clock in the hall swallowed seconds. The crib rocked. It had a cadence by then I could have named. 4 breaths, a tiny click as the runners kissed the same dent in the floor again and again, a sigh as the wood flexed. I sat with a blanket around my legs and a mug of something I'd intended to be tea and never steeped. Mara slept the sleep of people who trust gravity. The moon had not yet come up. The room smelled like lemon oil, milk, a trace of that other thing beneath, pennies and rain. At 2:47, a shadow moved where no shadow should be. It happened at the corner of my eye. You don't watch the corner of your eye, not at first. You keep your gaze safe, contained by the small circle of lamplight you've allowed because too much light is an insult to a sleeping child. But your brain watches for you, the way prey animals drink while watching the horizon. Something in the doorway darkened and stepped just out of sight. The hairs on my arms rose so quickly I felt the sensation splitting the skin. I did what civilized people do in haunted houses. I made a reason. Light, I told myself. Passing cloud. A car. Faint. The radiator shifting made a taller shape of the shadow from the chair. You are a loop of thread pulling through your own mind. Don't snag. The hum started again. I didn't know I'd been waiting for it until it came. Not loud at all. Under everything. You could have missed it if you let the house talk too much. My eyes went wet because bodies are stupid. My hands balled in my lap. No, I said out loud, because words take up space fear wants. No humming. The hum deepened, not louder, closer. It moved around the crib the way a woman with a work-worn body would move, slow, sure of where the dents in the floor were. The rocking answered it, finding its partner's step. I stood up, my spine locked. The rocking quickened a fraction. The hum swelled to a thing I could almost parse into syllables, old ones. Old things have no interest in your comprehension. Stop, I said. Please, stop. I leaned over the crib, and Mara startled in her sleep at the shape of me, the way they do, their animal brains registering hawk or shadow. She spat the pacifier and squeaked. I shushed her and lifted her, cradled, the smell of her hair an antidote that couldn't reach the real poison. Behind me, something brushed my shoulder. The contact was the lightest feathering, like someone passing behind you in a crowded room and forgetting how much space their sleeve takes. Every part of me attempted to leave the other parts. My vision whited, my knees fogged. Instinct is a dinosaur in us. I turned so fast Mara wobbled, and I had to clutch her harder than I should have, murmuring apology. There was no one behind me. The hum had stopped. The chair across the room began to rock. It was Mrs. Keene's chair. I knew it without knowing how, the way you know someone else's toothbrush in your mouth. And it tipped forward and back, not much, but enough so the legs made a tick-tock on the rug that was worse than any thunder. The air had the quality of held breath. That's the moment I decided the story I'd allowed myself about comfort was a lie. I ran then. Not elegant, not quiet. The nursery door slammed on its own as if someone had reached past me and pushed, hand above mine on the paint. My skin broke into heaves of goose flesh. Down the stairs with the baby in my arms, phone abandoned, blanket abandoned, mug cold on the floorboards. The first floor felt like a different house, emptied by our flight. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, phone screen bleeding light, texting nonsense to a friend who lived 2 time zones earlier. I held Mara too tightly and hated every shadow the lamp invented. In the morning, with the sun pouring warm absolution into the windows, it was astonishing how stupid it all was. The chair sat there like any chair. The cradle looked like a picture in a magazine about tasteful home designs. The ghosts, I did not think the word even then, but let's be honest, went quiet when the groundskeepers of day came with their blowers. I fed Mara and walked her through the rooms and told her birds' names and pretended I had not been a person I would have mocked 24 hours earlier. I didn't nap that day. I waited for noon so I could walk across to Nora's without startling her, and then I stood on her porch feeling both like a fool and a conspirator. She welcomed us in like she'd been waiting. Her whole house smelled like cinnamon and something green from a window box. Her living room faced ours. The lace curtains that looked like ours were cousins. She poured coffee that tasted like sanity and listened without interrupting as I told her, not everything, not the brush on my shoulder, not the way the chair had rocked in relief when the crib stopped, but enough. When I was done, she set her cup down and folded her hands. Lucy used to say, she began, careful as if testing ice, that a house gets used to the kind of life it has. You change it. Sometimes it rattles a bit. Rattles? She made a face that said, we both know what I mean. We heard things sometimes, especially after her boy died. Sometimes we thought she was humming up there. She always said rocking helps. Helps the blood, she said. Helps the quiet. She didn't like quiet. I looked down at my hands. I don't want to be the person who's... I stopped before crazy. It's a word that uses you when you think you're using it. It feels like something is. I made 2 fists as if squeezing a word into shape. Insisting. Nora's eyes softened. Lucy wore grooves into that life, she said. It's hard for grooves to teach themselves new shapes. If it is anything, she smiled without mirth, it might be an old woman who thinks she knows better than anyone how to rock a baby. I don't want anyone else rocking mine, I said. It came out harsher than I meant. Of course you don't, Nora said. Of course you don't. When I got home, the house felt expectant. I stood in the entryway and let the silence introduce itself. I could leave, I thought, ridiculous and practical at once. I could put the crib on the curb with a sign. I could move the rocking chair down to the basement. I could do none of those things and stay awake for the rest of my life. The baby monitor on the hall table made its soft ocean noise. Far off, the train's faint line. I climbed the stairs, and I brought a screwdriver with me. In the nursery, I put the baby in the bassinet and set the monitor close. Then I crouched at the crib and unscrewed the brass latch from its moorings. I removed the runners entirely. It took longer than I thought. The screws argued and stripped, resisting with a personality. When the last runner came away, I stared at the crib with the stunned satisfaction of someone who has diffused something they don't understand. I put the runners in the hall, like disarmed limbs, and leaned the chair against the wall so that it could not move without my permission. Then I sat on the rug and let myself feel the shaking that had waited politely while I worked. Nothing rocked that night. The absence of sound has its own shape. It sits where something else used to sit and stares. Mara slept in the bassinet by our bed, and when she rustled at 2, the room made only the domestic chorus of Sleeping House in Distant Night. I drifted in and out and woke with a start at 4 because I hadn't heard anything in too long and went to the nursery and found nothing. Just a square of moon on the floor, the crib still, the chair leaning idiotically, the lace at the window moving as lace moves in slight breaths. Relief rose in me like a tide. It lasted exactly one night. On the second night after the disarming, the baby monitor woke me with a sound I did not immediately parse. Not crying, not the white hiss. A wet mouth sound I first thought was her, except it had a shape to it, like syllables being mouthed without air. I turned the volume up and heard the hum. It came through the speaker like a voice wrapped in cotton. My body moved itself before I conceded meaning to my mind. Down the hall, the hum. Up the stairs, the hum. In the doorway, the hum. It was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The chair had somehow dragged itself flat despite my wedge. The crib, stripped of runners, pregnant with stillness, rocked. It rocked on nothing. It rocked like an idea that refused to be changed by the lack of any mechanism. The sound of wood on wood filled the room where no wood met. That broke something fine in me. The hum lifted. For an instant I heard a word. It was not a word I know, except my body recognized it the way bodies know the meaning of ghosts. Stop shouted at a child near a street. The mobile turned and turned, strings twisting so tight they squealed, then unfurling all at once. The window, latched, shuddered. The little muslin blanket rose from Mara's chest and settled again as if a hand had tested its weight. I stepped in, and the hum ceased like a throat cut. "Lucy," I said, because sometimes naming is the only power you have. "You have to stop." The silence swelled. House silences do that. They want to fill. My ears popped. Below us, somewhere in the kitchen, the ice maker clumped. "She's mine," I said softly. "I get to decide how she sleeps. I get to rock her if she is rocked." The chair creaked, a single protesting syllable. I reached for the crib to pull it away from the wall, some ridiculous idea forming that if I moved it into the hall, the spell would break, and my fingers slid into a groove in the wood, and something sharp bit me. I jerked back. Blood domed at the pad of my thumb. I sucked it, then stared. In the groove, just above the place where a mother's hand would go, the worn, smooth spot, there was a locket nailed into the wood. Invisible unless you knew where to look, matched varnish. I pried at it with my screwdriver and the nail came loose with a small scream of wood. The locket fell, bouncing once, and hung open. Inside was hair. Not much, just a curled lock, pale, brittle with years. Beside it, under a thin pane that had at some point cracked, a pressed four-leaf clover browned into memory. Beneath that, a scrap of paper like moth wing. On it, in the careful school curls of another era, 2 names, Thomas, and beneath it, in a different hand, firmer, darker, Mara. I didn't move for a long breath. My heart made a carnival in my ear. The air around the crib had grown very cold. "I wrote that yesterday." I said aloud without meaning to, though of course I hadn't. I was trying to convince the universe with a lie because truth was unbearable. It looked both new and old, like something written in a dream and left where you would find it later. The pen stroke was not mine, but the name was my child's, pulled into a timeline where it did not belong. Something at my back shifted, the sound of weight finding a new balance. I turned because turning is better than not, and the chair rocked forward and back once. Spray, What else could I call it? Lifted from the seat. Dust so fine it was almost a mist, huffed up by motion. In it, for a moment, there was the shape of a woman's bent head. No face, just the sense of a scalp below a neat bun. The hum rose again and split. For an instant, there were two notes, and the air filled with a grief so old it didn't know its own age. I could feel my baby's breath furring my wrist. "You can't have her," I said, very softly. "You had him. You had Thomas. You can't have mine." The crib rocked harder. The muslin blanket stirred. The mobile spun so fast one of the paper moons tore loose and zigzagged to the floor, and the noise it made when it landed was much too loud. The window, the one with lace, exploded. Not in shards, its single pane buckled inward in a river crack, and a cold, wet smell rushed in, the smell of rain and pennies dressed in old sorrow. The lace leaped as if something had run through it. For a moment I thought the house had lifted off its foundation. That's how much the world tipped. I clutched Mara and went to my knees, not in supplication, but because gravity had changed and wouldn't let me do otherwise. My shoulder slammed the crib and sent it skittering. It struck the wall and dented the paint with the boomerang head of a spindle. The locket skated across the floor and stopped at the chair's foot. "Stop!" I shouted, and now the word had a shape, a mother's voice, the kind that makes traffic lights appear around wild children. "Stop! Lucy, stop!" The hum thinned, the chair's motion slowed. It made one last tick and stilled. The crib made one last whisper and settled. The mobile, tangled now as a wrist in cords, turned once and hung there, a strangled thing. There was a smell of lemon oil and iron, and under that, like rain. Dust drifted lazily in the beam of streetlight, marching through the broken window. I sat on the rug with my baby against my chest and shook and shook. I do not know how long. Long enough that the sun found the edges of the sky and lifted them a little. When there was light enough to be a person again, I stood on shaky legs and lifted the crib, and without the runners, it was lighter than I expected. I dragged it down the hall, its feet thumping the floor in a rhythm that made my teeth hurt, down the stairs, through the kitchen where the ice maker had made a neat pile of perfect useless cubes, and out the back door. The yard was wet. The grass had drunk the storm. I set the crib in the middle of the patchy lawn, and then I went back for the chair. It took both hands and my knee, and a curse breathed into my elbow when the door bit me, but I got it out. I set them together in the morning light. Nora watched from her porch with a hand on her throat and did not call out. I didn't own lighter fluid. I didn't own a plan. I owned a furious clarity that made me efficient. I came back with a handful of old bills and junk mail. I went back again for a bottle of vodka left from before I was pregnant and drizzled it as if anointing. I set Mara in her car seat on the steps and strapped her in as if we were going for a ride. Then I struck a match on the box and held it to the paper, and the paper obligingly took the flame and made it a notched tongue. You worry about neighbors when you set furniture on fire in daylight. You worry about the police. You worry about whether you have lost your appointed mind. But the flame had the authority of an ending. It climbed the carved moon and touched it and made it black. It found the groove where the locket had hung and licked that too. The chair's seat went last, a blossom of fire where a body would sit. The smell of burning lemon oil and old varnish is sweeter than it has any right to be. It made me sick. The locket lay in the grass right where it had fallen, almost demure. I picked it up. The hair inside had come loose and drifted to the edge like a tiny animal who had heard a predator too late. The clover rattled against the thin pane. I looked at the names again. Thomas, Mara. "Rest," I said, towards the house, towards the woman who had never stopped moving, whose motion had become a spell. "Rest. He is not here." I paused and said, because I had become the kind of person who talks to the dead, You can sit down now." The fire made a sound like laughter in a far room. It burned fast. Old wood does. The neighbors did not come out, which I took as the town's gift to me. When the crib was black ribs and then those collapsed, when the chair sagged into itself like a body finally allowed to lie down, I poured the last of the vodka on the embers. The flare was brief and theatrical. I crushed the locket under my heel until the pane broke and the hair scattered and the names smeared to a brown stain. And then I carried those black bones to the curb in a barrel and left them for the men who take away our daily sins. Inside, glass shone like sugar on the nursery floor. I swept it while Mara watched from the doorway as if I were performing a magic trick. I taped cardboard over the broken window and closed the lace. I took the mobile down and untied it and threw it away. I brought the bassinet upstairs and set it where the crib had been. When I stood in that empty place where an old habit had lived, a pressure eased in my ears. It was quieter after that. Not silent. Houses don't do silent. There was still the train and the closet's swallow quiet and the respiratory sigh of steam, but the undersound was gone. On the second night after the fire, I woke at 2 with that sudden falling feeling, and when I went to the nursery, the only movement was the small lift and fall of my daughter's chest, the only hum mine. 2 weeks went by. The cardboard over the window softened at the edges. I learned the sound of our stairs, where they complain and where they make room. I made the mistake of Googling, once, Lucy Keene obituary, and found a line in a local paper and an old photo where she was young and standing next to a man in a suit with a baby folded into his arms. The baby was not named. I closed the tab. I did not need more names. Sometimes in the late afternoon when the light turns the color of tea and the leaves on Crabapple Street chatter to themselves, the house makes a motion at the edge of my vision, a suggestion, a thing that might be a desire to move if it had a body. When it happens, I say out loud to the empty nursery, "I see you," and then I put it away like you put away scissors, deliberately, with their point turned from you. Sometimes in the night that is warm with our breath and honest with the exchange of air, I wake because I think I have heard a rocking. It is always the radiator resetting itself, or the way the cat at Nora's jumps down from the sill across the street and startles the glass, or the train running through dreams at the town's edge. Almost always. Once. Only once. And maybe it was a dream, near dawn when the lace at the window was half a veil and half a spider web, and the gray of the world had not yet chosen the day, I heard a creak that sounded like a runner on wood, a once and no more, the sigh that follows a lowering into a chair. It could have been any of the house's old sentences finishing themselves. It could have been the weather. It could have been a woman who had finally learned to sit. I lay there holding my breath, and then I let it out, and in the room down the hall, my daughter turned her face to the side and sighed and slept on. 3 months later, we moved Mara to a new crib we bought in a store with 2 bright lights and too many choices. It is pale wood and has no runners and no ghosts sewn into the grain. I left the locket's broken halves in the kitchen drawer under the rubber bands and spare batteries until the day I found them there and did not know what they were, and then I threw them out with a handful of receipts and a dried-up pen. Sometimes when I carry Mara past the doorway, I feel the urge in my bones to sway. It's nothing. It's everything. It's the body's strongest habit. I stand still instead. I set her down in the white crib. I smooth the blanket. I say the same words I've said 100 times because repetition is the backbone of every spell, good and bad. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. If I listen then, very carefully, I hear the house listening back. And if the floor complains once, a sound like a runner remembering, I tell myself the story I have chosen. The story in which the real threat was never the rocking, but the belief that I owe the dead my child. The story in which I kept the magic and broke the ritual. The story in which a woman with tired hands in a small town did what she had to and learned, finally, how to sit.